Chapter 1820. In the middle of the night, the temperature dropped even further. J5, Chang'ing, and the others shoveled snow for 3 hours straight before they were called back to the tent by Yi Qian, who had just woken up from his nap. Along the way, Yi Qian sternly warned them that if they continued like this, their limbs would freeze to death. The male soldiers were not angry at her scolding. Instead, they were quite happy. Although it took longer, it was not a big deal. Every year during winter training, it was common for them to be suddenly woken up in the middle of the night to run with weights. 3 hours was not a big deal. Furthermore, they were divided into 3 groups. The Snowfield Brigade had 3 hours and the Tibetan soldiers had 2 hours. Once the road was cleared, the Tibetan soldiers had to drive. The 2 male soldiers from the Arts and Crafts Regiment and the 2 reporters from the News Department were in one group. They only needed 1 hour. The Tibetan soldiers couldn't help but laugh heartily. He was quite protective of his own people. It was good to have female soldiers in the team. They knew how to protect their comrades. As they walked towards the tent, J5 joked, "Oh no, Q King is going to have a lot to worry about in the future. He wants us to talk less and work more. Shoveling snow increases lung exercise. He likes to make us work and train at the same time." Yi Qian said, "That's not the same. That's a compulsory training in the team. We can divide the work and work together to recover the energy we expended. I don't think we should do everything just because we're soldiers. It's better if we work together. All right, we'll listen to you. Let's rest now. You should go back to the tent and rest too." J5 agreed readily and reminded him, "Don't call us by our code names. You don't know our names either. If you have anything to say, just come over and talk. You can't say your code name either. Our reports only have code names, not names. Remember, don't reveal each other's code names." So when he reminded him, he called out Yi Qian's name. There was Yi Qian's information in the military system, but it was as good as nothing. Even if someone knew his surname, they would not be able to find anything. The code names of the Snowfield Brigade members were much more important than their names. The commander of the rescue team and the injured instructor Gao were still in the tent. Yi Qian could not go in with them, so he left amidst the chuckles of his comrades. He took 2 steps and said, "I'll watch you guys enter the tent." His comrades were stunned. Then, they laughed louder. "Young Sparrow, I suddenly feel like I'm being controlled by my girlfriend." As soon as he said that, his comrades' laughter stopped. "Of course. Of the tiger. Of the tiger. Of the day. Whose girlfriend was Yi Jian?" "Of Yi. Ha, of course it's Q King. How dare he say something like that to Q King's girlfriend? He was asking for a beating." Young Sparrow did not know. He continued, "I've always been bold. Didn't they say that a gentleman's wife is a fair lady? I can't even say that. Which tiger is so domineering? I want to meet him. Yi Qian. Go back to the tent and rest. The reason we don't let young Sparrow talk is because sometimes he doesn't know how to talk. It's easy for him to offend people. He was just talking nonsense. Don't take it to heart." J5 dragged young Sparrow, who was not afraid of death, back into the tent. Damn, he did not want to be taught a lesson by Q King. Chapter 1821. Young Sparrow Hawk was baffled by his actions, but his mouth was covered. He wanted to ask for an explanation, but all he could do was whimper in his throat. "Why are you still struggling? I'm trying to save you, you know. Behave yourself. Don't start a dye shop just because I gave you some color," J5 warned in a low voice. There was an indescribable seriousness in his voice. Is Yi Qian your girlfriend? Can you woo her? With his mouth covered, young Sparrowhawk's eyes widened, and the whimpers in his throat grew louder. He had no intention of doing that at all. J5 slapped his head again. Shut up. If you have something to say it later. Chang'ing, who was chasing after him, also said, you never say anything nice when you open your mouth. Although you said what was on our minds, do you think we were as direct as you were? Think about it. Yi Qian is a female soldier and doesn't have much of a reputation. How awkward would it be for you to say such things in front of us? Can't you see that the smile on her face is a little stiff? Young Sparrowhawk, who finally realized what was going on, obediently allowed himself to be dragged away by J5. Seeing this, Chang'ing was relieved, but he was still a little nervous. Young Sparrowhawk wouldn't really have feelings for Yi Qian, would he? He clearly knew that Q King looked at Yi Qian in a strange way, so how could he have feelings for her? J5 was really troubled. He wasn't worried about Yi Qian being embarrassed, he was worried that Q King would teach him a lesson. Among his comrades in the Snowfield Brigade, only J5 knew about Xia Jinyuan's feelings, and he had known about it since a long time ago. He had been worried for a long time, afraid that Major Xia would fall in love with the underage girl Yi Qian and ruin his bright future. Later on, because the Shuayu Battalion was newly appointed as the Soldier King, their training became more difficult day by day. The two of them only saw each other once or twice a year. Only then did J5 remove the little sharp knife in his heart and gradually let go of his worries. Now, he couldn't be more relieved. Yi Jian was already an adult and had become a military academy student. They couldn't be in a relationship openly. If the two of them really had any tricks up their sleeves, they would have to do it secretly. However, based on his understanding of Q King, this was a disdainful man. Would he have a secret relationship that couldn't see the light of day? With his arrogance, it was impossible. Therefore, he was reassured that Yi Qian would be able to continue his 4 years at the military academy. Then, he would graduate and join the army. According to the regulations, there was an age limit for both male and female soldiers to get married, and the Snowfield Brigade's age limit was even higher. Even after Yi Qian graduates, ha ha ha. J5 would laugh every time he thought of this. Even if Yi Qian graduated, the two of them could only date and not get married. This was because Yi Qian had not reached the age required by the Snowfield Brigade. The girl he fancied would have to wait more than 10 years before she could bear fruit. If someone stupid jumped out and said that he wanted to pursue Yi Qian, J5's forehead would break out in cold sweat just thinking about the scene. That scene would definitely be brutal. No, he had to teach the bachelors in the unit a lesson. He had to tell them not to have any ideas about Yi Qian. If anyone dared to have any ideas, the consequences would be unimaginable. When they were only a few steps away from the tent, J5 finally let go of young Sparrowhawk. Although he was dragging the shorter scout in the unit, it was still very tiring. Young Sparrowhawk, who could finally speak, took off his cold mask and pulled J5 to the side. I'm not thinking about that. You're thinking too much. Pursuing Yi Qian. He knew his own limits. He was a scout, he was a scout. He had a pair of eyes that were good at scouting. He was not blind. Chapter 1822. Yi Qian, who had rested for 3 hours, didn't feel sleepy. Seeing that her comrades had obediently returned to their tents, she walked over to the pile of snow that still looked like a small hill. After shoveling for more than 3 hours, it didn't seem to be working. There's too much snow piled up there, and the snow on the mountain slid down several times during the shoveling, covering up the road that we worked so hard to clear. Qin Xiu shook his sore wrists and looked at Yi Qian with a gentle gaze. I'm afraid it's going to take 5 hours. Although they're shoveling snow over there, I'm afraid they're in the same situation as us. The snow was connected to the mountain. As they shoveled, the snow on top of the mountain would sink down. As long as the snow on the mountain was separated from the avalanche, the snow wouldn't slide down and affect their progress. Close to her, the white light shone on the side of her face. Qin Xiu could clearly see her delicate and full forehead. Her skin was as delicate as jade, and further down, he could see her long and black eyelashes. When she blinked, they were like a small feather that lightly tickled his heart. He wanted to look at her more carefully so that he could engrave her face deeper in his heart, but the girl who had been looking up suddenly changed her expression. Retreat. Seeing this, the Tibetan soldiers didn't hesitate and quickly retreated. Yi Qian pulled Qin Xiu's sleeve and ran away. On the other side, Xia Jinyuan, who didn't know that the scouts in the team were so good, suddenly put away the snow shovel. He suddenly grabbed his comrades on both sides and shouted, "Retreat!" G3 and Li Jinyan reacted quickly and quickly retreated. They saw that the snow connected to the mountain was stacking up under the layer of snow. After a minute, the large amount of snow connected to the mountain was stacked up like a pile of sand with a boom. 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 Snow and dust flew everywhere. White fog suddenly appeared in front of them, and thin snowflakes instantly covered their faces. This was the largest area of skiing. When the snow and fog dissipated, the mountain was separated from the snow. Several searchlights shone towards the mountain. Xia Jinyuan signaled his comrades behind him to turn off the searchlights. Then, he turned off his own searchlights and continued to flash. They could see the light on the other side. It seemed like the J5 and the others hadn't rested either. They intended to clear the path tonight. Very soon, the searchlights on the other side went off as well. Yi Qian also flashed his searchlights repeatedly in response. This was the contact information of the Snowfield Brigade, and it was asking if they were safe. Everything was fine, and he could rest assured. J5 and the others who were preparing to rest ran out when they heard the commotion. Even the female soldiers in the tent ran out. The commotion caused by the collapse of the snow was a bit loud, even the ground seemed to be shaking. I've just contacted my comrades on the other side. They're all fine. The Tibetan soldiers said that we don't have to worry about the snow on the mountain sinking down again. We just need to shovel the snow to clear the way. Yi Jian explained to J5. She also told Du Jie and the others who were running over and panting heavily as if they were about to pass out. Du Jie directly asked Qin Xiu, "Reporter Qin, how long will it take to restore the channel?" "I'm not too sure." Qin Xiu didn't want to talk to Du Jie. He lowered his voice and said in a hoarse voice, "According to the original estimate of 5 hours. So Reporter Qin knows Yi Qian, the female soldier who saved us. Please give me her contact information. I want to thank her properly." Du Jie had a motive for coming over to talk to Qin Xiu. Because she had just woken up, her voice was a bit drowsy and cute. Being polite and cute really made people have a good impression of her. Chapter 1823. But Qin Xiu acted as if he heard a joke. He looked at her indifferently and replied, "I don't know her. I was rejected when I wanted to interview her." "Really?" Du Jie didn't quite believe it because she trusted her intuition more. "I see. Sorry to bother you." If he didn't want to talk about it, she would investigate it herself. The leader of the relief command wanted to stay with them, but he was politely asked to go back to his tent by J5. He also wanted to ask Yi Qian to go back to his tent with the female soldiers. But when he saw the smile in Yi Qian's eyes, he turned around and left without saying anything. Obviously, he couldn't persuade her. Qin Xiu also wanted to persuade her, but he stopped when he saw the faint smile in her eyes. He immediately changed his words. You can go to the front and watch for us. If there is more snow, we can hide in time. Well, he could talk to her for a while. Once the road was cleared, they would have to go their separate ways. He didn't know when they would meet again. He didn't have her contact information yet. It was a bit presumptuous to ask now. He might as well go back and ask his uncle. At this time, the soldiers from the Mahjong military station had cleared the road blocked by the avalanche. Half an hour later, the slightly yellow but extremely bright headlights shone from the curve. Yi Qian, who didn't leave, looked at the approaching headlights. The smile in his eyes deepened. The road ahead should be cleared. Yi Qian reminded the Tibetan soldiers who didn't look back. He smiled and said to Qin Xiu, "That's good. You don't have to worry that I will say your identity by mistake." The headlights didn't hide the curve. Qin Xiu looked at it and then looked away. This was not good. Once the road was cleared, he would go to Immortal Bay, and she would have to go back to her unit. Which unit are you in now? Is it convenient to say? Qin Xiu, who originally wanted to ask Principal Chao, asked directly without thinking. Thank you very much this time. Otherwise, I really don't know how to deal with it. Although I can't repay you with my life, I can write a thank you letter. Du Jie reminded him that he could use the same excuse to ask for Yi Qian's contact information. I was sent to the village, and I'm still a student. It was normal for cadets from military academies to be assigned to the army. There would be cadets from the 3rd and 4th years, but it was not normal for a freshman to be assigned to the army. Yi Jian smiled bitterly and said, "Something happened and I was reprimanded. I'm here to experience the hardships of border soldiers." Hearing this, Qin Xiu smiled. "My uncle has been full of praises for you, saying that you are the most obedient and best student in Nan Nan Middle School. It seems that it is not true. How can you be sent to school?" It turned out that she was a military school student. Qin Xiu smiled from the bottom of his heart. Mrs. Qin liked girls who studied the most. They did not chat for long before Yi Qian stopped. Qin Xiu was a diplomat, and a very capable one at that. If she spoke too much, she was afraid that there would be loopholes, so it was better to remain silent. With the arrival of the soldiers from the Mahjong military station, it was even more inconvenient for the group to talk to Qin Xiu after they rested in their tents. The arrival of the soldiers from the Mahjong military station was undoubtedly good news for the art troupe. Du Jie, who had just closed her eyes, heard the commotion and was the first to walk out of her tent. Wei Jieyue, Lu Yuan, and Ma Min came out one after another. When they saw the truck, they secretly clapped their hands. "You're finally here. I thought that I would be stuck here for a few days." The leader is talking to the instructor, keep a low profile. Du Jie warned Ma Min in a low voice. Her gaze inadvertently fell on Yi Qian again, and then on Qin Xiu, who was standing in front of her. Did they really not know each other? Chapter 1824. Without giving Du Jie a chance to stand quietly and speculate, Instructor Gao asked her to take the lead to pack up the tents of the female soldiers, while the soldiers of the Matza military station picked up the ice shovels and began to shovel away the last layer of snow that was blocking the path from Kadatabin to Matza. The snow pile became smaller and smaller, and gradually, the sound of shoveling could be heard. G3 threw away a piece of snow that was frozen at the bottom and whispered to Xia Jinyuan, "There are more sounds of shoveling snow from the opposite side. It's highly likely that people from the military station are here. We can withdraw now." It was better for them not to show up too much for the secret training. At most, they would be able to clear the path in another hour. Han Zheng said softly, "If I remember correctly, we are all soldiers serving in the border area. If they really see us, they will only think that we are doing winter training. The military would always make careful arrangements for the training of a group of special forces with the country's hidden strength. They would also list out all the possible problems that might arise. Even if other troops knew about it, they would think that it was just a group of special forces in the military region undergoing winter training. G3 did not agree. They had also patrolled the secretly built satellite base with the soldiers of the Matsu military station. It was better to be cautious. Withdraw. Xia Jinyuan agreed with G3's words. It was indeed time to withdraw. Previously, he was worried because of Du Jie. Now that a few hours had passed, if anything had really happened, it would have happened long ago. If he appeared and confronted this hypocritical woman who he had not seen for almost 10 years, with her narrow-mindedness, it would be more troublesome. When he met with Little Fox, he would ask her alone. Han Zheng felt that it was a pity and silently said in his heart, I still want to meet Du Jie and talk about what happened between us back then. I really want to see her clearly angry, but she has to pretend to be magnanimous. Sigh, I really miss it, muttering silently did not escape Xia Jinyuan's eyes. He turned around and glanced at him coldly. Han Zheng immediately stood at attention and made a shut up gesture. Yi Qian saw Xia Jinyuan at 4:17 in the morning. The snow blocking their vision was shoveled away, and their searchlights shone directly at each other. Their eyes met and they saw each other immediately. The soldiers at the Matsu Military Depot, Kuti Military Depot, and Sonli Military Barracks were the first to speak. Then, the commander of the construction team stepped forward. Yi Qian moved to Xia Jinyuan's side and stood quietly by the side as he watched the J5's eloquent speech. Upon receiving Xia Jinyuan's signal, J5 took on the role of leader. Well, it wasn't really a role since he was the instructor of the Snowfield Brigade. Du Jie is a difficult person to deal with. Did you suffer any losses? That was the first thing Major Xia asked. Yi Qian sensed something and raised his eyebrows slightly. An old acquaintance. There was something wrong with the intonation of these 3 words. It seemed to have some other meaning. Major Xia, who was keenly aware of it, turned his head and glanced at her. Within a few seconds, he reacted. No wonder it sounded a little strange. It turned out to be jealousy. There was a smile in his handsome eyes. You can say that I'm an old acquaintance. About 10 years ago, when I was still a prince, I caused a ruckus. There was a hypocritical beauty snake. I had a deep grudge with her. How is it? Are you satisfied with my answer? Ahem. I guess I'm satisfied. Yi Qian felt a little uncomfortable. He had been jealous too much. There were many types of old acquaintances. Captain Xiao's tone was so cold just now, yet he did not notice it. Chapter 1825. After exchanging a few words with Xia Jinyuan, Yi Jianqian noticed that there was an inquisitive look in her direction. He couldn't help but glance over to see who it was. He said to Xia Jinyuan, I didn't lose out, but I was targeted. They belong to the category of people who don't get along with each other. I don't even want to say one more word. It's good that you didn't lose out. It doesn't matter if you're targeted. When Xia Jinyuan heard that he did not suffer any losses, the smile in his eyes deepened. He said with relief, you won't suffer any losses in her hands. I feel relieved in the future. Although he hadn't seen Du Jie for more than 10 years, this woman already had the ability to distort right and wrong. With the Du family's extreme education, it only made things worse. Xia Jinyuan wasn't worried that he would be recognized. Other than Chang'ing and Yan Zizi, who were the main scouts, the rest of his comrades in the Snowfield Brigade were all at least 1.85 meters tall. He wore his snow boots, a winter jacket, and a winter mask. It would be strange if Du Jiayi could recognize him. He didn't even recognize Du Jiayi from the group of female soldiers. But it really made him feel helpless. Why was Du Jiayi the one who was trapped? Could it be that she had done too many bad things and started to have bad luck when she reached a place without the protection of the Du family? It was fine if she was unlucky, but she even had to be rescued by Little Fox. Bad people really lived long lives. Du Jiayi's gaze fell on Yi Qian. She saw him standing among a group of tall and straight army soldiers. Her figure looked even more slender, as if she was being protected by the male soldiers while she was being pampered. Fortunately, she had seen reporter Qin, who was calm and composed and had the temperament of a scholar, and knew Yi Jian. Thus, she had guessed that this female soldier had some background. But now, it seemed that her first impression was right. She was just an ordinary female soldier who had some ability and was willing to be cruel to herself to climb up the ranks. If someone like her entered the capital or the military, would she try to stand out? She would be beaten back to her original state at any time. With that thought in mind, Du Jiayi's apprehension toward Qin Xiu dissipated in an instant. As she stared at him, she even lifted her chin a little. When Yi Jian looked over, she happened to see Du Jiayi, who had her chin slightly raised and did not hide her arrogance. She didn't wait for him to notice and calmly retracted her gaze. She stood side by side with Xia Jinyuan, and while waiting for J5 to speak with the station commander, she also spoke with G3 and the others in a low voice. It wasn't a formal occasion, so they could talk on their own. G3 looked at the female soldier who was almost half a head shorter than him, and there was a hint of a smile in his usually hoarse voice. Your courage is commendable. You have guts. He looked at the carriage that had not been dragged up yet. The entire carriage was supported by the front of the carriage. Although he had made sufficient preparations, the danger inside was too great. Even if he had made sufficient preparations, there was still a possibility that he would fall off the cliff with the carriage. Yi Jian climbed down just like that. She was able to rescue everyone trapped inside by herself. It was not enough to be brave enough. She also had to be calm enough. She was getting closer and closer to the requirements to enter the Snowfield Brigade. She was getting closer and closer to meeting the requirements. Xia Jinyuan listened to his comrade and Yi Qian's conversation. His eyes were dark, but there was a deep smile in them. He was worried for her, and even more so, he was cheering for her growth. As a Special Forces soldier who walked on a knife's edge, she danced with death every time she carried out a mission. Courage, perseverance, calmness, and so on were all indispensable. Only then could she defeat death and return to the team with glory. Chapter 1826. Qin Xiu had also secretly glanced at Yi Qian, but he was very good at hiding himself, so Yi Qian didn't notice. As a diplomat, he had the ability to observe people from head to toe. Now that he had used this ability, Yi Qian really didn't notice. Otherwise, why would Qin Xiu be the youngest and most promising diplomat? Qin Xiu couldn't get Yi Qian's attention even after glancing at him several times. Qin Xiu couldn't help but rub his forehead and smile helplessly. Seeing that the meeting had ended, Yi Qian only focused on the tall and imposing soldiers after returning to his team. He didn't even look at Qin Xiu from the corner of his eyes. It seemed like she thought that he was just a stranger she was familiar with. Qin Xiu didn't notice that Xia Jinyuan's gaze had swept over him the moment he lowered his head. Major Xia had only glanced at him for a moment before looking away. Why did this guy who looked at Yi Qian 6 times look a little like Qin Xiu? Why was he with the arts team? Also, there was something wrong with the way he looked at Qin Xiu. It was as if he was hoping for something. Major Xia, the soldier king, was not someone to be trifled with. He had only taken a few more glances at Yi Jian, and he immediately caught her. Perhaps because Yi Qian didn't give any response, Qin Xiu didn't look at him anymore. Major Xia didn't think too much about it since he didn't see him clearly. In front of them, the station master thanked J5. Then, Instructor Gao and the leaders of the rescue team thanked them one by one. After about 10 minutes, the meeting finally ended. The female soldiers of the arts team were shivering from the cold. They hugged their winter clothes tightly and had to maintain their image, so they could only stomp their feet occasionally. When they were finally allowed to board the car, Yi Qian saw that they all heaved a sigh of relief. Wei Jiayue, who was standing by the side, looked back at Yi Qian before getting into the car. She only stepped into the car after being urged by her comrades. If Du Jiayi really did something, how should she contact Yi Qian? Should she ask her family to help her check? Come in, I'm freezing. If I stand any longer, I'm really afraid that I'll fall straight down in front of the leaders. I really want to drink some hot water, even if it's 70 degrees Celsius. Right now, I feel like my heart is cold and there's no warmth at all. I'm afraid I'll be skinned alive when I get back to the outpost. As the vehicle swayed as it drove, the female soldiers who were too cold to sleep started chatting with each other. The sky seemed to be brightening. Wei Jiayue, who was sitting at the outermost part of the carriage, pulled the curtain to a gap. There was a truck in front of them driving in the opposite direction. The female soldier whom she admired was getting further and further away from them. She could hear her comrades discussing her. They all thought that Yi Qian was the most outstanding and the bravest female soldier they had ever met. Wu Ziwei, who came from a liberal arts background, suddenly sighed. After Yi Qian, there will be no Yi Qian. After Yi Qian, there will be no Yi Qian. After some time, Lu Yuan said softly, after Yi Qian, there will be no Yi Qian. But I don't know if there will be any Yi Qian in the future. Du Jiayi's gaze towards Yi Qian was like a brand in her heart. After Yi Qian, there will be no Yi Qian. If Du Jiayi really wanted to make things difficult for Yi Qian, then, there will be no Yi Qian. I'll retire the year after next. I don't know if I'll be able to see Yi Qian again. A female soldier like her is really admirable and worthy of respect. Don't talk about retiring. It makes me uncomfortable. Chapter 1827. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi translations being discharged from the military was always a topic that soldiers didn't want to talk about. Even Wei Jiayue, who hadn't joined the conversation, couldn't help but frown. When she heard them speculating that Yi Qian was a female soldier from the border troops, Wei Jiayue interrupted them. Her comrades were chatting excitedly and said calmly, "Let bygones be bygones. Let bygones be bygones. You all know why I'm saying this." The atmosphere in the car was originally quite good. Everyone had survived the disaster and met a powerful female soldier, so they were in a good mood to chat. But now, the atmosphere was cold. They looked at each other and no longer had the interest to chat. After a soft sigh, the car returned to silence. Only the heavy sound of the wheels grinding on the snow could be heard. Let's not talk about it anymore. If we really got Du Jiayi involved, no one would have a good ending. While the members of the Snowfield Brigade were chatting happily, V8 smiled and said to Yi Qian, "Captain knew that you went to save people, so he drove at a speed that made everyone tremble in fear." After driving for more than 3 hours, all of us underwent a physical and mental tempering. Our psychological endurance improved again. Qing Niao, this time we've trained our courage again. When I got out of the car, my back was sweating a few kilograms. It was all because I was scared by Q King. Listening to their cheerful voices, Yi Qian's lips were about to curl up. It was still more comfortable to be with his comrades. Even his mood was a lot better. When J5 heard this, he looked meaningfully at Major Xia, who was sitting next to Yi Qian, and said slowly, "That's for sure. Qing Niao is the only female soldier in our team. How can Q King not be anxious? If it were me, I would be anxious too." How could he not be anxious when he knew that his comrades were in danger? Any member of the Snowfield Brigade would be anxious. Otherwise, why didn't V8 remind Xia Jinyuan? And why didn't his comrades in the car remind him either? Because they all wanted to rush over as soon as possible. However, they did not know that there was another reason why Xia Jinyuan drove so fast. Only Han Zheng knew the reason. Therefore, Xia Jinyuan chased Han Zheng to another truck. Hearing that J5's tone had changed, Major Xia smiled and squeezed Yi Qian's palm lightly with his big hand. He leaned over to her ear and said in a low voice, "Now you know how anxious I was at that time. I was afraid that you would be at a disadvantage in the hands of that woman. Stay away." His breath was right next to her ears. It turned out that this part of her body was sensitive. Furthermore, she had been frozen earlier. Now that her skin was warm in the car and her sense of self-awareness had recovered, he was talking so close to her, her ears were tingling. They were sitting very close to each other. If she tilted her head and made a noise, J5 and Xia Jinyuan, who were sitting opposite them, would definitely feel that something was wrong. To put it bluntly, she was actually feeling guilty. She was feeling guilty that she was talking to Xia Jinyuan and they were unaware of it. Xia Jinyuan was a man who was both fun and a little evil. Seeing this, he raised his brows slightly. Instead of keeping a distance, he leaned closer and grabbed Yi Qian's right hand with both hands. His voice was as low as the strings of a zither. "You heartless little fox. I was so worried about you. How could you bear to reject me? You should at least give me some benefits. For example, come closer and talk to me like I'm doing right now." If she really leaned over, he would take advantage of the bumpy ride to tilt his head and let her kiss his cheek. He was prepared. Otherwise, why would he take off his windbreaker and windbreaker hat when he got into the car? His intentions were indeed good. Chapter 1828. Today, Yi Qian was no longer the prickly Yi Qian who kept everyone at a distance and was always vigilant. He was also no longer the young girl who was so flustered that she didn't know what to do when Major Xia pressed her under his body. After interacting with him for so many years and being intimate with him for so long, Yi Qian now had his own way of dealing with Major Xia's thick skin. In the past, he would have blushed and sat on pins and needles whenever he heard such words. Now that he heard this, Yi Qian only raised his eyebrows and glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. He said with interest, "Captain Xia, I'm afraid you won't be satisfied with the sweetness you want to taste. But if you're not satisfied with it, I'm afraid there will be more to discuss. However, at the end of the day, Captain Xia, you're worried about whether I will be taken advantage of because of an old friend. You know Du Jai first, so you know her well. Because you know her well, you're worried that she will get into a fight with me and cause me to be taken advantage of." Hearing this, Major Xia's eyelids twitched slightly. He suddenly had a bad feeling. Then, he heard Yi Jian's faint smile. "Actually, if Captain Xia didn't know my old friend, he wouldn't have thought that I would be at a disadvantage and wouldn't have rushed over so anxiously." Major Xia immediately sat up straight. Even if the car bumped, he still straightened his back and didn't dare to act rashly. If Commander-in-Chief Xia was here, he would definitely clap his hands and laugh heartily. He would also say to the daughter-in-law he approved of, "This is the right way to teach him a lesson. We can't let him have the chance to take advantage of us." Why did Commander-in-Chief Xia recognize Yi Qian as Family Xia's daughter-in-law after only meeting a few times? The reason was simple: Yi Qian could subdue the former devil incarnate in the family. Xia Jinyuan didn't dare to say anything now. He needed to listen to what Yi Jian had to say and ponder over it before he opened his mouth. Family Xia was a little strange. There was one type of person in the family that a family Xia man didn't dare to offend, and that was his own wife. The men of the Xia family could do whatever they wanted outside, but when they were at home, they were all filial men who loved and coaxed their wives. They had no choice. They were in the army all year round. It wasn't easy for them to come home and get together with their wives. If they didn't behave well and dote on their wives, if their wives ran off with someone else, they would suffer a huge loss. Major Xia had inherited the Xia family's excellent family style very well. At this moment, he was also listening to whatever Yi Jian said seriously and did not dare to suddenly open his mouth and interrupt. It was also because he loved and respected Yi Jian from the bottom of his heart that he was willing to put down his pride. In the end, you're worried. Because you're worried. If you're not, of course, you're because I don't teet. If I didn't know him, based on my understanding of the Major, he would have definitely sat high up in the stands. No matter how worried or nervous he was, he would have let me face it alone instead of rushing over in such a hurry. Major, am I right? Xia Jinyuan didn't dare to talk about giving him a taste of the sweetness and changed the topic. If he continued to talk about the sweetness, he would only have to suffer. You're absolutely right. If he didn't say yes now, when would he? If he didn't go along with his girlfriend's wishes, he would be an idiot. Without any hesitation, Xia Jinyuan immediately expressed his absolute approval. I know her first, that's why I'm worried. If I didn't know her and didn't know her, I would have waited for you at the military depot. This was the truth. There was no lie. Chapter 1829. The smile on Yi Jian's face deepened. She believed him because he would tell her the truth when it came to serious business. We're not afraid of anything. Missions of life and death are nothing. These are things we have to face. I won't step in because this is something you have to face as a special forces soldier. Xia Jinyuan was Xia Jinyuan after all. With just a few words, the smile on Yi Qian's face gradually disappeared, and she listened to him attentively. You're a soldier brought up by Uncle Qin and Uncle General. They brought you out with the hope that you can go further in the military and stand at a higher position. I, on the other hand, am taking you on a more arduous and dangerous path filled with thorns. Little fox, your life is my life. I cherish it very, very much. I can't bear to see you in any danger. The more it's like this, the more I have to let go. The more ruthless I have to be. As long as I'm not resting, I'm only your superior and not your boyfriend. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to be with you for the rest of our lives. Sweet nothings didn't need to go back and forth like, you can't leave me, I can't leave you, I love you, you love me, you're the wind, I'm the sand. And so on. Sentimental but easily forgettable sweet nothings. Words of love could be like Xia Jinyuan's, full of bloodthirst, ruthlessness, and ferocity. However, this was just the surface. Once this surface was peeled off, you would see his sincerity. He only wanted to be with you for the rest of his life, to be with you through trials and hardships, and to be able to survive through the smoke of war. If you could withstand the smoke of war, withstand the rain of bullets, and temper it with blood, then your love would be stronger than gold, and you would have no regrets in life. Yi Qian was a female soldier who didn't like to hear overly emotional confessions. After living 2 lives, she had seen too much hypocrisy. Instead, she preferred the truth. Therefore, Xia Jinyuan's words were always able to move her. Major Xia, who originally had some ulterior motives, saw her solemn expression and became even more serious. We will meet many different kinds of people in our lives. Today, let's talk about villains. I'm worried about you because the most dangerous kind of villains have appeared. You have to be careful when villains appear. Otherwise, you will become a stepping stone for them. Especially people like Du Jai, who is kind on the outside but cruel on the inside. She looks kind and generous on the outside, but secretly stabs you in the back. You have to be even more careful. I've known her for a long time. I used to be a gangster. Not many people dared to offend me because of my family background. I had a few friends who didn't want to study. One of my friend's sister was good friends with Du Jai. One time, when a good friend of his went abroad to take an exam, he accidentally lost his well-kept admission ticket. He couldn't find it even when the exam started. Du Jai. As a good friend, Du Jai was anxious. A few minutes before the exam, she went around looking for her friend's exam ticket. Du Jai also had to take the exam. She was in a different exam room. A few minutes before the exam, she was worried and worried. She comforted her friend and said that they would think of a solution together. She really did make a few calls to see if there was a solution. Everyone thought that it was worth it to have a friend like Du Jai. When Xia Jinyuan said this, the coldness in his eyes disappeared. I believe it too. I feel that this little girl is quite loyal. I even told my friends that a girl like her is better than a boy and is worth befriending. Chapter 1830. In the end, Du Jai was the one who picked up the admission test long ago. The reason was because his brother's sister had said that her dress wasn't pretty. Han Zhang had overheard this by accident. Otherwise, no one would have believed that his good friend would miss the entrance exam just because someone said that her dress was ugly. What was even more frightening was that she had been quite anxious for her good friend at the time. His friend's family had wanted to use their connections, so they didn't care about Du Jai's presence and told her all the countermeasures. Du Jai, who was anxious in front of others, took the initiative to cut off her good friend's escape route. She directly went to the examiner and told him that someone had lost their admission ticket and was looking for connections to take the exam without a permit. She pretended to help you time and time again, and cut off your escape route again and again. Only when you no longer have the strength to fight back would she stop and quickly kick you out. This kind of villain is the scariest. She has the ability to keep her composure. She can kill people without batting an eyelid. Du Jai is already so terrifying when she was in her teens. 10 years later, Du Jai will be even more difficult to deal with. Yi Qian was really dumbfounded when he heard this. Just because his good friend had said that her dress was ugly in front of others, she had kept it in her heart. She had taken action to cut off his good future. Moreover, she was only in her teens at the time. The two of them sat side by side. The lighting in the car was dim. Although Xia Jinyuan couldn't see Yi Qian's expression, he knew that he must be very surprised. When Han Zhang told him that year, he didn't believe it. Just now, Little Fox said that she didn't suffer any losses. It was clear that the two of them had met. Major Xia raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "Come, tell me how you met her. With this woman's tolerance, she will definitely secretly investigate your identity when she returns from the border. We need to come up with a countermeasure first." He was not afraid that Du Jai would make any moves. He only hoped that she could make some big moves. In the end, he would definitely give Advisor Du a headache. When Yi Qian heard this, she felt that something was not quite right. He seemed to be hoping that Du Jai would secretly investigate her identity. She suppressed her suspicions and told him the whole story of how she met Du Jai. "I climbed onto the roof of the car to ask about the situation inside, but Du Jai was the first to speak. After everyone was rescued, when she was talking to Instructor Gao, she was implying that I climbed onto the roof of the car without caring about my own safety because I wanted to show off. I didn't argue with her before because I didn't want to waste my breath on such a person. But now that she's slapping my face so blatantly, I won't tolerate it. But later on, he didn't think that Du Jiayi could be Yi Ying's aunt. When Xia Jinyuan heard this, even though he didn't laugh out loud, his eyes were full of smiles. That's right. With our status, we can't take the initiative to bully them. But if they bully us, it's fine if it's just a commoner, but for people like Du Jiayi, there's no need to tolerate it. Even if you go against the Du family for me, it's fine. Yi Qian seemed to ask casually, but in fact, her left hand was tightly clenched. She didn't believe that the Du family didn't take action in her previous life. Just as Wei Jiuyue said, the Du family was a family that cared about their reputation. They wouldn't make things difficult for her openly, but secretly. Therefore, she didn't believe that the Du family in her previous life didn't know that Yi Ying was always making things difficult for her. She also didn't believe that Yi Ying was brave enough to hide her in-laws to kill her. Chapter 1831. She did not resent the Du family for not doing anything. After all, in her previous life, she was just an insignificant person to the Du family. They would not deliberately make things difficult for her. At most, they would turn a blind eye. But now, if Du Jiayi really wanted to take revenge for something that was her fault in the first place and she was merely retaliating, then she would really go against the Du family. Yi Ying was related to the Du family, but she would directly go against the Du family. Yi Qian only now felt that the battle between her and Yi Ying had begun. In such a cold weather, Yi Qian, who was waiting for his answer, felt his palms sweating. If he went against the Du family because of her, would he be willing? Xia Jinyuan did not answer immediately. He first took off the glove on his left hand, then the glove on Yi Qian's right hand. He then held her right hand tightly and stared at her with a heavy gaze. Why do you ask such a question? Du Jiayi's family is not simple. I'm worried. Her answer made Major Xia chuckle softly. He said somewhat arrogantly, in the capital, if a family Xia dares to claim second place, then no one dares to claim first place. Du Jiayi's family is not simple. Then let me ask you, do you think my family is simple or not? This was the real Xia Jinyuan. Arrogant, disdainful, and domineering. It was not repulsive, but natural. Yi Qian was a little lost in thought. She looked at him quietly for a long time without looking away. The two of them talked back and forth. They did not hide their conversation from their comrades in the carriage, but when Xia Jinyuan glanced at them, they all consciously looked away. Even the J5 did the same. Probably feeling that something was wrong, the J5 sitting opposite them looked over slightly. He only glanced at Yi Qian for a moment before immediately looking away. He nudged G3 with his elbow. G3 turned his head and saw the J5 winking at him. He said softly, "Why do they look like they're fighting?" He and the J5 were comrades who knew the relationship between the two of them, so it was best to sit opposite them. Hearing this, G3 glanced at Xia Jinyuan from the corner of his eye. He lowered his head and said softly, "It doesn't look like it. They're not angry. If a couple quarreled, their faces would be dark. If he quarreled with his teacher's girlfriend, it would not be like the two of them sitting opposite them." G3 judged whether the two of them were fighting or not based on experience. They're not fighting. Why do I feel like they're different? J5 was a little worried. In the past, he was worried that Xia Jinyuan would ruin his future by dating an underage girl. Now, he was worried that Xia Jinyuan would give Yi Jian to other troops if he was not careful. As an instructor, J5 felt that he had been worrying too much. Between the two of us, there's no need to talk about it with outsiders. You don't have to worry. Q King is a calm person. He knows what to do. G3 said a few words and stopped talking. He was a man of few words, so he only spoke a little more than K7. The J5 thought for a while. He listened to his comrade's words and did not pay attention to them. Yi Qian, who had been silent for a long time, sighed softly and said, "I'm just afraid that I'll drag you and Commander-in-Chief Xia down. Little fox, if my old man Xia heard what you said, he would scold me until I was black and blue. He would definitely say that I'm not very capable. That I'm usually very good at causing trouble. That I'm very arrogant outside. Since I'm so capable and arrogant, why can't I get my own wife? Why can't my wife treat my family Xia as her own?" Chapter 1832. Fortunately, the venue was small and there were many people around. Otherwise, with Major Xiao's thick skin, he would have hugged Yi Qian and cried about how difficult it had been for him. Major Xiao's thick skin was just as thick as his skills. As long as there was a chance, he would show Yi Qian just how thick his skin had grown. Yi Qian thought of Commander-in-Chief Xiao's past and couldn't help but chuckle. "There's no such thing as dragging you down. You're my girlfriend, the love of my life. Commander-in-Chief Xia only recognizes you as his daughter-in-law. If the Du family dares to plot against you, the first person who won't let the Du family off is old man Xia. By the way, let me tell you something that old man Xia doesn't want to be mentioned. Don't say it. I don't want to hear it." Yi Qian immediately interrupted. She was just short of covering her ears. She was just a military school student. She really didn't have the guts to listen to the Commander-in-Chief's private matters. Xia Jinyuan said disapprovingly, "Old man Xia has many private matters that he doesn't want to be mentioned." Du Jiayi's mother had a lot to do with the divorce between him and his ex-wife. Back then, his ex-wife was hesitating whether to divorce or not. Old man Xia was still trying to salvage the marriage. Mrs. Du introduced a talented man who could write a good love poem to old man Xiao's ex-wife. Then, in order to pursue true love, his ex-wife resolutely divorced old man Xia and left the country. "Can you stop talking?" Yi Qian was already scared out of her wits. As a daughter-in-law, this was definitely not something she could listen to. No, it was something she could listen to as a military school student. "No, I have to say it." Major Xia decisively refused, and the more he spoke, the brighter the light in his deep dark eyes became. Old man Xia originally wanted to pursue her again after the divorce, but who knew that once his ex-wife went abroad, as a soldier who couldn't go abroad for personal matters, he was stunned. Mr. Xia acted like a great general and didn't blame Mrs. Du. However, Advisor Du, who was also a regiment commander at that time, reported Mr. Xiao's behavior in order to compete with his ex-wife. After his ex-wife found out, she resolutely divorced him. Yi Qian really didn't want to listen, but the man beside him was talking excitedly. He was just short of clapping and talking at the same time. She didn't understand why he was so happy when his mother was gone. In short, Advisor Du Jiayi and old Xia have been at odds with each other for decades. So, if Du Jiayi dares to plot against you, well, don't blame old Xia for taking action. Major Xia said with a smile. He saw that his little fox was holding her forehead with her left hand, so he added, "And I am really grateful to Madame Du. It was all thanks to her that I have a good life today." Old man Xia really didn't have a good eye for choosing a wife back then. No wonder my old madam was against it. If that ex-wife of his is still in the family Xia, I doubt if I can walk the right path. After living for 2 lifetimes, Yi Qian really heard a son talk about his own mother like that for the first time. What did Commander-in-Chief Xiao's ex-wife do to make her own son treat her so coldly? About me and Commander-in-Chief Xiao's ex-wife, I'll tell you next time. I'm afraid you'll be disgusted. As for the Du family, Xia Jinyuan stopped smiling and his eyes suddenly turned cold. He said coldly, "As for the Du family, you don't have to worry about them. I'll protect them. If Du Jia dares to touch them, well, her military career will come to an end. If I can't even protect you, I don't deserve to be your boyfriend." Chapter 1833. If I can't even protect you, then I don't deserve to be your boyfriend. There was no need for him to be so affectionate. Just from his calm tone, it was clear that Xia Jinyuan valued Yi Qian greatly. Xia Jinyuan would never say who he would protect. His status and family background made him a reserved, and steady man. He wouldn't make promises easily, much less agree to anything easily. He said, before he met Yi Qian, he had never said that he would protect anyone. No one had the honor of receiving a promise from this noble man. But now, he was clearly telling Yi Qian that he would protect her. Not just for a while, but for a lifetime. Because he was her boyfriend, her lover. Yi Qian felt tears welling up in her eyes when she heard this. No one had ever said such words to her in her previous life, not even words that were similar to this. In her previous life, no matter what she did, she ended up with nothing because of Yi Ying's interference. Not only did she end up with nothing, but because of Yi Ying's instructions, those who didn't dare to offend her were full of malice towards her. Thinking back to her previous life, only the security company gave her a sense of security and the medical school gave her a temporary peace. After a long time, she gently shook his strong hand and said softly, "Thank you, Captain Xia. Thank you. Thank you for saving me from being homeless in this life. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know what it's like to be pampered. Thank you. Thank you for letting me not be afraid anymore. Thank you even more. I only know what it means to be complete with you in this life." Yi Qian was a girl who was easily satisfied. Xia Jinyuan had always known that she had never made excessive demands of him. She had never thought of relying on him to solve those troublesome matters. Even when it came to the matter with Yi Zhifan, she had never said that she wanted to use him to explain. She was a girl who had always relied on her own efforts to move forward. Even though she had suffered a lot in her previous life, she still maintained a sincere heart. She was kind and grateful. How could such a girl not move Xia Jinyuan? Xia Jinyuan's meeting with Yi Qian was the beginning of his happiness, and also the beginning of Yi Qian's happiness. Her sadness did not escape Xia Jinyuan's eyes. It could be said that Yi Qian's every move could be instantly detected by Xia Jinyuan as long as there was a slight change in her emotions. Gently holding her hand, he said in a low voice, "The Du family has always disliked our family Xia. Ever since old man Xia became the regiment commander, they have been making things difficult for us. Therefore, Du Jia dared to do something to you. To the family Xia, it was a piece of evidence that they could use against you. Your thank you is in vain. Family Xia and Du family are not on good terms." Yi Qian was still a little worried that she was trying to coax him. He frowned slightly and asked carefully, "Are you saying this because you're afraid that I'll feel guilty? Who would dare to make things difficult for the family Xia of a military aristocratic family? This family was tough enough, right? Who would dare to offend them? Did this person not want to live long enough? If he wanted to make an enemy out of the Xia family, he would have to weigh his own abilities first." Chapter 1834. You're just a silly fox. Do you think I would make up such a big lie out of fear that you would feel guilty? Her cautious expression pierced his heart deeply. His girl had suffered a lot since she was a child. Before she met Uncle Jen and Uncle Chin, she did not receive the love and protection she deserved. Therefore, she was so afraid of losing her family and everything beautiful. She was even more afraid of implicating the people who cared about her. Clasping her fingers tightly, Xia Jinyuan said word by word in a low voice, "The matter between the two families can't be explained in a few words. If you are interested, I will tell you another day." Only then did Yi Jian believe her. Her frown visibly relaxed as she smiled. "No wonder I didn't like Du Jiayi the moment she opened her mouth. It's because of you." Seeing her smile, Xia Jinyuan's heart softened. Before the age of 14, no one loved her, no one protected her, and she was bullied by Yi Jifan's family everywhere. Even in such an environment, she was still able to be physically and mentally healthy. In the words of old man Xia, the daughter of a martyr must be different. She was indeed different. It was Xia Jinyuan's fortune to have met such a different girl. Therefore, he did not want to see her sad because of the past. His girl should be happy. Even if the road to the military was full of thorns, he still wanted his girl to be happy. If she was not happy, he would use his own way to help her walk out of her sadness and regain her happiness. Major Xia, who prioritized Yi Jian, gently squeezed the slender little hand in his big hand. His thin lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of a mischievous smile. "I actually don't want to accept your thank you. If I accept it, I won't be able to make any other requests. But if I don't accept it, I'm worried that you will feel uneasy." Her sadness did not escape Xia Jinyuan's eyes. Therefore, he began to show his mischievous nature again. "How about this? I'll accept your thank you, and then you can give me some benefits. For example, a kiss." Speaking of sweetness, Major Xia, who had forgotten the pain after his scar healed, became energetic again. He glanced at all his comrades in the car and saw that all of them had their eyes closed. He leaned over and said, "Just once, not too much." Every time this happened, Yi Qian felt helpless. Why was it that the dignified Major Xia, who was always so proper in front of others, could only be proper in front of her for less than 5 minutes? Other than in battle, there was no one else who could be so serious the entire time. The moment she heard that bad tone, she just couldn't feel any disgust. Fortunately, the comrades who had been running around for a day and a night had already fallen asleep. Even the J5 and G3 sitting opposite had their heads leaning against each other. They hugged their rifles tightly and closed their eyes as if they were sleeping soundly. With their eyes closed, they saved Yi Qian from a lot of embarrassment. "Are you shy? Then I'll close my eyes too." Before he could finish his sentence, Yi Qian suddenly leaned over. She found her target and kissed him directly with her slightly cold and delicate lips. Her target, Major Xia's thin lips. Major Xia was a little stunned when he felt her slightly cold lips. His little fox was so bold as to kiss him on the lips in front of all his comrades. And he actually had his eyes closed and wasn't looking at her properly. "How is it? The dessert tastes good, right?" Yi Qian had already sat up straight and asked him calmly, "Compared to the dessert you wanted, I think Captain Xia would like this dessert more." Although it was a light kiss, what did he mean by that? It meant that his girl was beginning to accept him completely. Chapter 1835. It wasn't just a little bit of pleasure, it made him so happy that he really wanted to do it again. But that was obviously impossible. Only Major Xia, who looked regretful, casually glanced at the J5 opposite him and said, "Since when did you suddenly attack? It was over before I could react." What a pity. The sky was already bright outside. In the hazy morning light, Yi Jian, whose eyes were curved like a painting, was smiling. Her gaze was slightly tilted as she looked over with a woman's coquettishness. "As long as Captain Xia likes it." Major Xia nodded repeatedly. He really liked it. He didn't mind doing it from time to time. He really liked her sudden attacks. She was simply a sweet bomb. Major Xiao, who had kept his back straight from the beginning to the end, looked the most serious on the surface, but his hands never stopped moving. One moment, he would use his fingers to rub the back of Yi Qian's hand. The next moment, his fingers would hook tightly around Yi Qian's fingers. The next moment, he would grab Yi Qian's hand and stuff it into his pocket to warm it up with his body heat. There was no other way. He still had regrets. His heart was itching. If he didn't find something to do, his heart would feel terrible. The Tibetan route to Dabin was full of twists and turns, and there were countless dangerous roads. The two trucks carrying dozens of special forces followed this dangerous road that had sacrificed countless engineering soldiers to reach the same destination that everyone had arrived at together. The J5 moved slightly. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. What quarrel? Their feelings were clearly sweet. Yi Qian was bold enough to kiss him directly. Their captain was stunned for at least 3 seconds. Obviously, he didn't expect Yi Qian to suddenly kiss him. TSK, TSK, TSK. This sweetness made his mouth feel like it was full of sweetness. He wanted to look a little longer, but unfortunately, their captain didn't let him. A cold gaze inadvertently swept over, making him quickly close his eyes. He thought he had hidden it well. Who knew that everything was exposed? Ha ha ha, this was probably why Yi Qian was stunned when he kissed him. Even when taking a shower in the unit, he had to draw the curtains. Q King, who valued privacy very much, wouldn't let others see his girlfriend kiss him, not even his comrades. It was quiet in the car that was filled with friendliness. Everyone's body was swaying along with the bumpy road. Sometimes they were leaning forward, sometimes they were leaning backward, sometimes they were shaking left and right. In such a dynamic environment, all the Special Forces soldiers in the car, including Yi Jian, were sleeping soundly. It was amazing. Occasionally, the back of a member's head would suddenly hit the hard surface of the hard car. With one eye half open and the other closed, they didn't even need to rub the back of their head and went back to sleep. At night, they met up with the remaining members of the Storm Commandos and began to complete all the tasks in the altitude training. Qin Xiu and the rest arrived at the outpost at Xinxian Bay around 2 in the afternoon the next day. When they arrived at the outpost that was close to the sky, he and another translator, who rarely spoke or showed up, got out of the car and went into the camp arranged by the outpost. They never came out again. The sky above the outpost was very blue. There were no trees or grass. Under the white snow, there were brown gravel. Because the oxygen content in the air was less than half that of flat ground, but the ultraviolet intensity was half that of flat ground, it was extremely difficult to plant trees in Xinxian Bay. The arrival of the art group made the outpost lively. Red lanterns were hung up even before the spring festival. Although the water was only 70 degrees, it was a temperature they could hold in their hands. Chapter 1836. Singing, dancing, and skits were all performances that the art troupe could perform. There were still 10 minutes before the 2-hour performance ended, but the soldiers in the outpost were still reluctant to leave. Du Jiayi suggested to Instructor Gao and the leader in charge of the construction to see if they could increase the interaction between the soldiers and the art troupe. Company Commander Feng of the outpost looked at the time and saw that there was still a familiar figure who had not returned. He agreed readily. When the soldiers and the art troupe sang together and the atmosphere reached its peak, Company Commander Feng quietly stood up and left. Not back yet. He walked directly to the platoon leader who was standing guard on behalf of the soldiers tonight and whispered, "If he doesn't return in half an hour, quickly send soldiers out to receive him. If something were to happen to a diplomat and a specialist of a certain heavy and powerful weapon right under his nose, he would be a sinner of the country. The place he went to has to avoid being noticed, so it will be a little slow. If he doesn't return in half an hour, I will immediately send someone to receive him." The platoon leader nodded lightly with his windbreaker mask covered in white frost. He looked around the barracks vigilantly and said, "Half an hour ago, a soldier reported to me that the female soldier with the rank of captain in the art troop asked him which outpost a military officer named Xia Jinyuan was at. He graduated from the National Science and Technology University." Graduates from the National Science and Technology University all had military ranks, so he was definitely not an ordinary soldier. When Company Commander Feng heard this, his eagle-like eyes shone brightly. Although he did not know who Xia Jinyuan was, it was a little abnormal for him to come to the outpost to ask about a military officer who graduated from the National Science and Technology University who might be assigned to the border. What was even more abnormal was that if it was a normal person, he could have asked him directly and not a normal soldier. As a sentry at the border, any military officer's alertness was definitely not ordinary. Only the female soldier with the surname Du is a captain in the art troop. Ask the soldiers to keep an eye on her and not let her wander around. Company Commander Feng no longer had a smile on his face. He became very serious. "If she asks the soldiers again, ask the soldiers to bring her to see me." As he spoke, a few small black dots moved faintly. The platoon leader immediately looked through his binoculars. "Company Commander, the political commissar is back. Keep an eye on the inside. I'll go pick them up." Compared to the performance of the art troupe, Company Commander Feng naturally placed more importance on the commissioner who came for the border defense, as well as the diplomat who was also a translator. The translator accompanying Qin Xiu was not a translator, but a missile specialist who carried an important object with him. The satellite launch base at the northwest border of the entire frontier had entered the final phase of testing. At the same time, there was also the construction of a national defense base. The snowy mountains in the northwest of the frigid winter border were sealed off, but it was also the best time for some national defense to be launched. Qin Xiu accompanied the commissioner here and was in charge of completing the exchange between the commissioner and an important figure of a certain country that purchased our country's missiles. Exchanges between countries that could appear on TV could be widely publicized. Exchanges that could not be released could only be considered core exchanges that were completed in secret. Qin Xiu, who was protected all the way back, saw the national flag fluttering in the wind in front of him. Although he could only see the outline of the flag, Qin Xiu still felt a sense of security, as if everything had finally been arranged. As a citizen, only in his own country could he truly feel a sense of belonging and security. Qin Xiu, who had finally completed his mission, declined Company Commander Feng's invitation to watch the art troupe's performance. Du Jiayi was present, so he did not go. He did not want to be recognized. Chapter 1837. As for Mrs. Qin's advice, Qin Xiu chose to forget about it. The commissioner didn't go to watch the performance either. He returned to the barracks with Qin Xiu, closed the door, and rested. Their mission was complete. They could finally have a good night's sleep. Qin Xiu lay on the bed and didn't fall asleep immediately. Although his body was very tired, so tired that he couldn't even open his eyes, the image of Qin Yan, who was full of spiritual energy, still appeared in his mind. She was an interesting girl. She didn't resemble any of the girls he had seen before. The real socialites in Beijing were all capable, but compared to Yi Qian, they were still a bit lacking. His first impression of Yi Qian was her unforgettable face. The sunlight shone through the clouds and through the glass, scattering light on the girl sitting by the window. As he waited, he inadvertently looked up. The girl bathed in the sunlight had delicate skin. When she looked back, her watery eyes seemed to gather the purest spiritual energy in the world. She was attractive at first sight. She was very beautiful. At the time, he thought so. Moreover, he used the pillars as a cover to blatantly admire her smile. At the time, he didn't hide his bad nature at all. Her youthful face, youthful figure, bright smile. Later, when he saw her again, he recognized her at first glance. A second-year high school student could accompany a leader overseas. Which socialite in Beijing had such an honor? If he wanted to pursue Yi Qian, he would have to tell his rigid Mrs. Qin. Only if she agreed could he succeed. Otherwise, with Mrs. Qin's feudal mindset, she wouldn't accept a daughter-in-law with an ordinary background. Thinking of this, Qin Xiu couldn't help but chuckle. He was really daydreaming. Daughter-in-law. With Yi Qian's talent, she had the right to choose a daughter-in-law, not her. However, Mrs. Qin and the Qin family had to pass before he could pursue Yi Qian. Regardless of whether he could win her heart in the future, he didn't want her to be humiliated because of her family. Suddenly, the faint sound of a woman's voice came from outside the window. Qin Xiu, who was resting with his eyes closed, didn't stay for long, but when the voice came from outside the window, he inadvertently heard it. Company Commander, is there really no soldier named Xia Jinyuan in our outpost? But why did I hear that he was serving in the most remote outpost in the border? Are you afraid that I'll disturb him, so you purposely said that you don't know him? Or did he serve here before and was transferred away? It was Du Jiayi's voice. She was asking about Xia Jinyuan's whereabouts. You're wrong, there's no doubt that he's in the outpost. The most remote outpost in the border. There are many outposts. There are many outposts. Of course, you have to be sure that he is assigned to the northwest outpost of the border. Company Commander Feng smiled as he looked at the captain of the Arts and Crafts Regiment who had come to look for him after the ceremony ended. His dark purple face had a faint smile as he patiently explained, a military academy graduate from the National University of Science and Technology has a military rank. If he was really assigned to our outpost, as the company commander, how could I not know? Captain Du, I can tell you with certainty that there hasn't been a single officer named Xia Jinyuan assigned to our outpost in the past few years. He was quite stubborn, insisting on getting the answer he wanted. But how was he supposed to answer when there was no one here? Chapter 1838. Du Jiayi finally believed that he wasn't lying to her. It seemed that he wasn't at this outpost, but at another outpost. She immediately put on a dignified smile and said, I'm sorry, Captain. Xia Jinyuan and I are old friends. He never contacted his mother after he joined the military. I was only looking for his whereabouts because his mother asked me to. I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time. Company Commander Feng had already learned about the situation from Instructor Gao and knew that there was no problem with Du Jiayi's identity. He smiled brightly and said, It's not a problem at all. It's a pity that I couldn't help you. Company Commander Feng had a good impression of the staff officer's daughter, who was polite and didn't put on airs at all. He was very willing to help her. How about this, Captain Du, you write a letter, and I'll ask around at each outpost. If there's any news, I'll send a letter to Barracks 30 Li. What do you think? When Qin Xiu heard Du Jiayi's overjoyed reply, his lips curled into a smile. That's for the best. She was so anxious to find Xia Jinyuan. It seemed that the daughter of the Du family liked Xia Jinyuan. The two families had a dead knot, and Xia Jinyuan was a strong-willed person. Du Jiayi would probably be frustrated. Of course, that wasn't his main concern. His main concern was that he could explain to Mrs. Qin that the daughter-in-law she liked already had someone in her heart. As her son, he wouldn't be the bad guy and ruin Du Jiayi's plans. With the Qin family's traditions, they didn't want rumors to spread about the daughter-in-law they liked. The first person to object wouldn't be Mrs. Qin, but the old master, who was enjoying his old age. The Qin family had always been strict. In the early years of the war, the Qin family went abroad to avoid trouble. After they returned, the old master Qin restrained the younger generation of the family from doing anything rash in order to prevent them from ruining the foundation of the Qin family. When it came to the grandchildren's generation, the Qin family was considered stable. However, the old master Qin couldn't help but feel a little angry when it came to history. Therefore, even if the Qin family returned to its prosperous state before the war, the family's traditions were still strict. The slightest deviation would anger the old master Qin. If one of the grandchildren married a woman who had a bad reputation before she got married, the old master Qin would remove his name to correct the family's traditions. The conversation outside gradually quieted down. Qin Xiu heard Du Jie ask, "How are reporter Qin and his colleagues?" Only then did he know that Company Commander Feng and the others' excuse. He didn't know if he would tell Du Jie the truth or not. As a company commander of the outpost, he couldn't possibly make such a big mistake. The sound of footsteps and conversation gradually faded away until the surroundings were quiet again. Qin Xiu, who was lying flat on the bed, closed his eyes again. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth. He had probably solved another worry, so he fell asleep after a while. The charcoal stove emitted a certain aura. Smelling the unpleasant smell, Qin Xiu slept until dawn. The next day, Qin Xiu began to do what he was supposed to do as a reporter. He interviewed the company commander, platoon leader, and comrades. Then, he followed the company commander up to the high-altitude outpost. It took Qin Xiu 2 days to finish. During this time, Du Jie made excuses several times to come and read his manuscript, but she was rejected. In the end, Du Jie's face was livid. She didn't calm down even when they returned to the 30-mile camp together. Xia Jinyuan, who was about 300 kilometers away from the 30-mile camp, found out that Du Jie was asking about his whereabouts on the 4th day after Qin Xiu and the others returned to Beijing. At the same time, she also inquired about which army Yi Qian belonged to, what the number of the army was, and other information about his identity. Chapter 1839. In response to her inquiry, the leader of Camp 30 Li said, "This is what a soldier should do and also a soldier's duty. You don't need to repay me to avoid ruining the atmosphere." His words directly blocked Du Jie's words, making it impossible for her to ask other leaders. She had no choice but to return to the Nongguang military region with regret. When Xia Jinyuan found out that Du Jie had asked about him while asking about Yi Qian, his eyes suddenly sharpened. "She found out that I was serving at the border." She didn't know that he was training at the border, but she found out that he had been serving there since he graduated from the National University of Science and Technology. On the 3rd year of Yi Qian, he had entered the Snowfield Brigade and received a mission to protect the construction of a satellite base in the border. His comrades in the Snowfield Brigade, such as J5, G3, Z7, and so on, had accompanied him. Because of some unknown reasons, this group of comrades had to travel to the border of a certain country to meet with the military there. In addition, the two sides had to exchange information. Only a few of them, who only had military ranks and no military information, had information about their military service at the border. Previously, Han Zhang had said that he still remembered that he belonged to the border army, which was why he had served in the army. It was understandable for her to ask about Yi Qian, but it was incomprehensible for her to ask about Xia Jinyuan's whereabouts. What's more, she was actually asking about him at the border. It was obvious that she was very certain that he was serving at the border. The only way to find out that he was serving at the border was by using his identity to protect the construction of the satellite base. The Major General had already investigated this matter thoroughly, so he said, "The border is at the level of the Deputy Military Region. This is Staff Officer Du's hometown. It's not difficult for Du Jie to find out if she wants to. She's really something. Just because it used to be his hometown, she can casually reveal the location of a soldier's military service. Xia Jinyuan's face immediately darkened. There was a strong sense of hostility between his handsome brows. You've stretched your hand too far. Be careful not to get stomped. The Major General was shocked when he heard this. Du Jie had directly investigated Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan from the system and triggered the warning system. The head of the military's top secret department immediately reported to him. In less than half a day, he had investigated the entire matter, including how Du Jie knew about it. There was obvious hostility in Xia Jinyuan's voice. Major General Liu knew a thing or two about the Xia and Du families. Because he knew about it, he had to settle it properly, in case Xia Jinyuan brought it up without knowing it, which would give Staff Officer Du another chance to go against the family Xia. He then said, all of your information is now classified as top secret. Your identities are not in the entire system. Therefore, there is no leak of information about the members of the Snowfield Brigade. Furthermore, even the fake identities you used to enter the satellite base were classified as top secret. Even Advisor Du did not have the authority to investigate them. Xia Jinyuan said in a low voice, I trust the military on the confidentiality aspect. Please tell me how she found out that I was serving at the border. She found out that you were serving at the border from Staff Officer Du then. She didn't ask Staff Officer Du personally, but... The Major General paused for a rare moment. When he spoke again, even his tone was much softer. It was the Commander-in-Chief's ex-wife who asked Staff Officer Du. Staff Officer Du said that he knew you were serving at the border a few years ago, but he didn't know anything else. Chapter 1840. Du Jie knew that you might be serving at the border. This was what the Commander-in-Chief's ex-wife told her and asked her to find out. When she left 2 letters. One was in the hands of Company Commander Feng at the outpost, and the other was left at Camp 30 Miles. Wasn't Madame Xiao the Commander-in-Chief's ex-wife? Why would Madame Xiao, who had brought her son along when she was having an affair, suddenly want to find out about him? He didn't tell Mr. Xia about her affair, which was considered repaying her for giving birth to him. When you went to the border to ensure the construction of the base, you went there as an ordinary officer. Staff Officer Du was the one who approved you, so it's normal for him to know. Moreover, he only said that you were serving at the border, but he didn't say anything about the army or other details. You should calm down a little. Major General Liu didn't want him to lose his mind, especially when the Commander-in-Chief's ex-wife, Madame Xiao, was involved. In this family, the person who didn't want to contact Madame Xiao the most was Xia Jinyuan. It was already unbelievable that Du Jie wanted to find out where he was serving, but in the end, it was actually Madame Xiao who asked her to do it. Xia Jinyuan couldn't help but look up at the sky. The sun didn't rise in the west and set in the east today. You don't have to give me the letter. Just destroy it. As for the anger in my heart, to be honest, I'm not angry at all. He originally wanted to find out what Du Jie's motive was, but now it was completely unnecessary. Didn't Madame Xiao see her as her biological daughter? Madame Xiao asked her biological daughter to do something, so her biological daughter had no choice but to accept it. Xia Jinyuan, who contacted Major General Liu through the ground navigation system, smiled faintly and said, since she was asked by Madame Xiao, it doesn't matter much. However, you still need to keep an eye on Yi Qian. She can't find out Yi Qian's information just because she wants to. Moreover, her information is classified as top secret along with yours. If anyone searches for Yi Qian's information in the system, the military's confidential department will immediately know and contact me. Yi Qian hasn't joined the army yet, so she can't find anything even if she wanted to. The Major General was not worried that Yi Qian's information would be investigated, nor was he worried that someone would find out about Xia Jinyuan. Instead, he was worried that Xia Jinyuan would do something irrational because of Ms. Xiao's interference. The Snowfield Brigade did not belong to any army. In some cases, every member of the Snowfield Brigade was an unregistered citizen without any information about their identity. They had enjoyed all the privileges of our country's soldiers when they were alive, but if they died, they might not be able to enjoy the glory that a soldier should have. Only the Major General of the army had access to the information of everyone in the Snowfield Brigade. Even Commander-in-Chief Xia did not have the authority to do so. However, Xia Jinyuan wanted the Major General to be careful, so he told him about the friction between Yi Qian and Du Jia. It's not that I'm overly worried, but Du Jia is a vicious and merciless person. Major General, you still need to inform the school. With Xia Jinyuan's reminder, the Major General frowned and said coldly, she's so narrow-minded. She repaid kindness with ingratitude. If she dares to do anything to Yi Qian, she won't be able to wear her military uniform for long. Yi Qian was the focus of the military's training. She was not at fault for rescuing Yi Qian, but she used her family's power to harm Yi Qian just because he replied to her. The military was not the Du family's military. It was also not a place where the Du family could cover the sky with one hand. With the Major General's nod, Xia Jinyuan felt a lot more relieved. Then, he listened to the Major General talk about the meeting between the Snowfield Brigade and the Storm Commandos. He picked out the main points of the meeting and told him about it. The military has decided to train 2 special forces teams, sea, land, and air. Chapter 1841. The Snowfield Brigade is already one, and the Storm Commandos will be the 2nd special forces of our country. In the future, no local troops will be involved in the training of these 2 forces. This decision was made because, with the development of the Internet, all kinds of eavesdropping and stealing methods were directly related to high technology. In addition, China's self-developed high-tech weapons were unveiled during the Great Celebration, and all the developed countries had already turned their attention to them. Since the Great Celebration until now, the various countries had already caught countless spies who had tried to get close to the troops and bribe military personnel. The Snowfield Brigade was not only the top special forces of our country, but also the most mysterious special forces of our country. In the future, as the country's military strength increased, this mysterious special forces would receive more and more difficult missions. Therefore, the Snowfield Brigade would also usher in a brand new reform. We will discuss the reform proposal you proposed 3 years ago again in the meeting. We agree that the Snowfield Brigade will be divided into 2 teams, and we will use Chinese and English as a substitute for each other. We agree that each team will have 2 combat commanders, but you still have to be the overall commander. Regarding the reform of the Snowfield Brigade, Xia Jinyuan had already mentioned it to the military in the form of a document 3 years ago. However, because the changes were too big, the military did not make any moves. After the Great Celebration, the spies in the country suddenly became rampant, and there were even a few cases of intelligence leaks. The military immediately attached importance to the reform plan proposed by Q King. One of the reports mentioned that in the future, the stolen intelligence would mainly be high technology. The Snowfield Brigade would have to cut off cooperation with the local troops, which was a big disadvantage. They would have to exist in an absolutely confidential form and become a true independent force, a true secret special forces. Whenever the Snowfield Brigade arranged for training in the country, if they needed the cooperation of the local troops, the military would directly give the order to the person in charge of the local troops. They would not mention the number or the name of the person, but would only report the number to the person in charge of the local troops. No one would know what kind of troop had trained here before, and no one would know what kind of troop they had cooperated with before. It was like a ghost troop that suddenly appeared and suddenly disappeared. Just like the training this time, there was still the cooperation of the local troops, which was precisely what Xia Jinyuan could not accept the most. In the end, he ran into Yi Qian's junior high school classmate. Even though he wasn't sure if that boy was Yi Qian, it still made him suspicious. After the confrontation, he immediately reported it to the military. With this incident, coupled with the increasingly rampant illegal activities, the military finally agreed to Xia Jinyuan's reform policy. 3 years ago, Xia Jinyuan had already seen it. 3 years later, he had even focused on analyzing the reserves of special forces in various developed countries. He had also clearly pointed out that there were too few special forces in China for tri-terrain combat and that they had to be nurtured. The Storm Commando team was originally an amphibious frogman assault team, but because of Xia Jinyuan's document, they directly became a reserve amphibious assault team, and all their training programs would be improved. Li Jinyan was a little stunned when he learned that they had become a reserve amphibious assault team. He immediately asked the Navy commander, "Why did you suddenly make such a decision? There was no news at all before this." He didn't receive any news at all. When it was first established, it was positioned as an amphibious unit. How did it become a reserve tri-terrain unit without him knowing anything? It made him feel that it was too rushed. Chapter 1842. He also didn't know how the storm commandos he led had suddenly become a preparatory, tri-amphibious, special forces. Indeed, Demon Kingly was a major who could withstand the storm and the test of surprises. He didn't panic or be surprised. He only asked calmly. Naturally, he had to ask clearly. It was impossible for him to lead his men into a tri-amphibious, special forces in a daze. Not only was this irresponsible to himself, but it was also irresponsible to all his team members. It can't be considered sudden. The military already had a plan 3 years ago. The meeting ended at around 2:00 in the morning last night. The Navy commander had been waiting for Li Jinyan to call to report on the progress of the training. He was very happy in his heart, and his tone was rather calm. He didn't show it. "I didn't expect to choose the Storm Commandos led by you in the end. After all, our team hasn't even been established for 2 years." The military decided to put another tri-amphibious team on the agenda after the celebration. They chose from several special forces in various military regions, and in the end, they chose the Storm Commandos led by you. Jinyan, your ability is obvious to all. Although I'm surprised, I also think that this is the responsibility you should bear. You have to shoulder this responsibility that has been given to you. I'll hand the Storm Commandos over to you. I hope that you can achieve something. Chase after your goal, and one day, you will truly surpass that SEAL team in the West. As a member of the Navy, Li Jinyan had set the Western SEAL team as his goal from the very beginning. He had led all his team members to train day and night. In less than a year, he had submitted an outstanding result to the Navy and the military. The SEAL team was the top tri-amphibious force in a certain Western country. If the Storm Commandos could surpass it one day, it would definitely be something that would shock the entire world. However, Li Jinyan knew how big it was to achieve this goal. However, no matter how big it was, he would not give up. If he couldn't do it, he believed that the captain of the Storm Commandos could do it. As long as he didn't give up, hope would always exist. After listening quietly, Li Jinyan's eyes darkened. When he looked at the blue sky, he was even more determined. He said calmly, "Okay." Only the word "good" meant that he already knew, and that he would definitely shoulder the responsibility given to him by the country. No excuses, no concessions, no hesitation, and no timidity. As a Marine, Li Jinyan knew his mission and responsibilities. He was a soldier. In the face of challenges, he would be calm and collected. He would never allow himself to panic. Instead, he would challenge and win. He would never admit defeat and sacrifice himself. He was already prepared to welcome a brand new future. Although Li Jinyan and Xia Jinyuan had completely different personalities, their beliefs and perseverance were the same. One could see the brave and fearless spirit of modern soldiers from their figures. Xia Jinyuan didn't tell Yi Qian about how Du Jie had left the border to gather information about her after the Highland training ended. She didn't want to distract Yi Qian during the most dangerous individual combat training on the Highland. Take the hiding in the snow training as an example. If a person directly hid in the snow without moving for a few hours, they would be like a popsicle. He really couldn't bear to let someone like Du Jie distract Yi Qian. She not only gathered information about you in the border, but also about me. Now that the Major General is keeping a close eye on her, she hasn't made any moves yet after returning to the Nongguang military district. Chapter 1843. Xia Jinyuan didn't hide anything. He even told Yi Qian everything that Du Jie had asked about him. I reminded the Major General. Now that the Major General is helping us keep an eye on her, if she dares to do anything, she won't be the only one who will suffer. Staff Officer Du will suffer too. Ask about Captain Xia. Why is she asking about you? This was Yi Qian's main concern. Even his tone was much colder. Why would she come to the border to ask about you? Where did she get the news that you're in the border? Is it from her father's place? Captain Xia didn't show up that night. If she knew that he was in the border, it would be a very serious matter. It was an important matter regarding Captain Xia's safety in the country. Xia Jinyuan had already seen Yi Qian's sharp senses. Now that she had grasped the main point and asked directly, he wasn't surprised at all. He gently brushed off the frost that had gathered on her eyebrows and explained, she didn't know that I was training here. Do you still remember that year when we fought together in the snowy highlands? I was on a mission at that time. For some reason, I became an ordinary platoon leader in the border. The border was where Staff Officer Du had worked his way up. At that time, he only knew that I graduated from the National University of Science and Technology and was serving in the border. Madame Xiao found out from Staff Officer Du that I was serving in the border, so she asked Du Jie to ask about me. As for why she asked about me, I don't want to know. It couldn't be anything good. Moreover, he didn't want to have anything to do with Madame Xiao. Yi Qian was relieved. He was afraid that she knew that Captain Xia was training in the border, so she directly asked about him. She also noticed that his tone was especially cold when he mentioned Madame Xiao, even with a hint of disgust. Yi Qian knew who Madame Xiao was. Although she didn't know why he had such an expression, she was definitely on his side. Just ignore her. It's not worth getting angry over someone you don't like. She advised him with some heartache. During this period of time, he had been planning the training. Sometimes, he didn't even have time to give her homework at night. If you're tired, don't let someone you don't like affect your mood. Xia Jinyuan wasn't someone who would get angry over Madame Xiao. He just simply discussed. Affect his mood. She really didn't have that right. As it was a private matter between the two of them, they chose a place where no one else was around. After glancing around to make sure there were no comrades around, Xia Jinyuan suddenly bent down and gave Yi Qian a quick peck on the cheek. His thin lips curved into a wanton smile as he said, "You guessed wrong. You should be punished. Your Captain Xia is not someone who is easily affected by others. Of course, this little fox in front of me is an exception. Just a small look or a small action from her can make my mood fluctuate. Indeed, it didn't affect his mood at all. It could be seen from his indecent behavior. Yi Qian, who had just been kissed, glared at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only coquettishness. You're getting more and more mischievous. Status. Mind your own status. I pay a lot of attention to my identity. I don't dare to forget it at all times, but I do need to relax occasionally, especially now that it's rest time. Major Xia had always known how to strike a balance between work and rest. They had left the highlands at night. Now, it was equivalent to taking half a day off to wait for the helicopter from the aviation team to arrive. He could take advantage of the rest time to have some sweetness. It could help him sweep away the stress of the past half a month. The two of them didn't leave alone for too long. Just as Yi Qian said, they still had to pay attention to their status. In addition, Li Jinyan came looking for them, so Yi Qian left first and seized the time to revise her homework. Returning to school would be the midterm exams, so she had to hurry. Chapter 1844. It was bitterly cold in the northwest of Xinjiang, but the sun was shining brightly in Nangguang. The lowest temperature today was only 8 degrees Celsius. Compared to the dozens of degrees below zero in Xinjiang, Nangguang was as warm as spring. Yi Zhifan, who was in a suit for the first time, was in a sharp contrast with the soldiers in dark green uniforms. Seeing that the door of the office building was guarded by heavily armed soldiers, Yi Zhifan could not help but swallow his saliva. He had been an officer for nearly 20 years, and this was the first time he had interacted with a senior officer in the army. He put his left hand into his pocket and touched the cold jade pendant. A trace of uneasiness flashed in his eyes. Yes, uneasiness. The reason why he could talk to the young master of the Du family was because he received a call from the mysterious man again. It had been more than 10 years since he received a call from the mysterious man. When he received the call again, the disguised voice did not change much. Probably because he was older, the voice was not as impetuous as it used to be. When the voice came from the phone, he almost thought that he was going to take back the jade pendant, because he didn't let Yi Jian become useless at all. Instead, he watched her go further and further away and stand higher and higher. Even he, a dignified bureau chief, couldn't do anything about it. So he was afraid. He was afraid that the owner of the jade pendant, who had sent him to his official career, would take back everything he had and leave him with nothing. But he did not expect that the mysterious man, who he had not contacted for more than 10 years, would say, "Try to send Ying to the army. He will provide the opportunity." Sending Ying to the army. This was what he had been dreaming of. He followed the order and went to Nangguang to save the young master of the Du family, who was attacked by the mafia during dinner. He was the commander of a brigade in the Nangguang military region. He had racked his brains in the Nan province but still could not do it. But in less than 4 days, he had done it easily in Nangguang. Although he had been stabbed in the back, it was worth it. It was really worth it. "Commander, Bureau Chief Yi is here." The guard knocked on the door and told him the purpose of his visit. There was no immediate answer. Just when Yi Zhifan was feeling a little uneasy, the half-closed door suddenly opened. A soldier in his early 30s with a medium build opened the door personally. His eyes fell directly on Yi Zhifan, and he laughed loudly. "Bureau Chief Yi, I have been waiting for you. Please, have a seat." This was Chief of Staff Du's eldest son, Du Kaiwei, 33 years old. He was the commander of a brigade in Nangguang military region. His enthusiasm suddenly made Yi Zhifan's heart but when he saw Commander Du smile. "Director Yi, you should have time to have a meal with me after we're done with work." Of course. And I. Director Yi had blocked the knife for him. If he hadn't blocked it, the knife would have landed on Du Kaiwei's neck, and his head would have fallen to the ground on the spot. Just because of this, he could not neglect it. Yi Jifan smiled very elegantly. Facing the warm hospitality, he was still calm. He did not show how happy he was. Chapter 1845. Before Yi Jifan went to Nanguang for the business trip, he had already roughly learned about the Du family situation. Although it was not a real prominent family, it was still quite rich. Chief of Staff Du's family was relatively simple. There was an elder brother who was the second most powerful person in Nanguang province. His children had already joined the army. Although Chu Yunqing didn't know what they were doing, with an elder brother who was the second most powerful person in Nanguang province, it shouldn't be too bad. Chief of Staff Du was the second son. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Commander Du was the eldest son. He was only 33 years old. He also had a younger sister who was a member of the Standing Committee of Jiang Province. This Mrs. Du was in her early 40s, she only had 1 daughter, and she was still studying abroad. But the most noteworthy one was Chief of Staff Du's wife, Mrs. Li. It could be said that the reason why the Du family could become what it was today was largely because of Mrs. Li. She was a very knowledgeable and decisive woman who relied on her family's connections to raise the Du family, which was originally just a peasant family, to its current status. Yi Jifan deliberately learned about Mrs. Li when she was young and what had happened in recent years. He knew that her status in the Du family was quite high, and everyone in the Du family respected her very much. Chief of Staff Du also listened to her every word. Mrs. Li was in charge of everything in the Du family, and she never asked about it. However, it was also understandable that a woman who relied on her family's connections to raise her husband's family to its current status would treat her like an ancestor. This commander in front of Chu Yunqing also respected his mother very much. It was because of this Madame Li that Yi Jifan had no choice but to be cautious. Facing Du Kaiwei's warm hospitality, Yi Jifan, who purposely learned about it before coming here, took a sip of tea and said calmly, "Commander Du, you are too polite. The thing you told me last time, I have thought about it again and again. My daughter is studying abroad in France. If she suddenly drops out of school and joins the army, once she stops studying, it will be very difficult for her to pick it up again. She just turned 19 years old a few days ago. I'm afraid that she won't be able to handle the hardships if she joins the army at such a young age." It was not that he didn't want to bring Yingying back to Nanguang province, but with Mrs. Li, a powerful woman who didn't like other people forcing her to help him, he needed to know what she wanted. In the Du family, only when Mrs. Li nodded her head would things go smoothly. Moreover, he didn't believe that Mrs. Li didn't know that he saved Du Kaiwei. He even suspected that it was Madame Li who suggested to let Yingying join the army. She wanted to test him. If he had really met Du Kaiwei by chance, it would have been fine. However, he had been arranged step by someone else. The Du family was not an ordinary family, so he felt a little uneasy. He had to be careful at every step. Du Kaiwei's eyes flickered when he heard this. It was a little strange that he had actually refused. Du Kaiwei gently placed the teacup in his hand back on the solid wooden coffee table. He rested one arm on the back of the sofa and spread his legs slightly. He sat casually and had a domineering aura. He couldn't help but smile and ask, "Director Yi, you don't believe me, right?" According to his investigation, in order to send his daughter to the army, Director Yi had put in a lot of effort and tried to establish a relationship with the Southern Province military region. Unfortunately, he failed every time. In his opinion, the biggest failure of Director Yi was that he married a wife who was as stupid as a pig. It would be strange if Director Yi could establish a relationship with the Southern Province military region after offending a national treasure like that. Du Kaiwei did investigate Yi Jifan's affairs. When he learned that the person who saved him was the director of the construction bureau of the southern province, he was a little relieved. He originally suspected that it was a trap. Chapter 1846. She also found out that Yi Jifan's political achievements were excellent, but he didn't have any connections with the military. She wanted to build a relationship with the military, but he was always rejected. So she completely believed that saving him was not a trap. But Mrs. Li was right, no matter what the result of the investigation was, seeing was believing. After he finished speaking, Du Kaiwei, who had been very polite the whole time, stared at him without blinking, patiently waiting for him to answer his question. Commander Du, this is not a matter of whether I believe you or not. I just don't want my daughter to stop studying. Also, my daughter is still young and naughty. She made a big mistake in the college entrance examination, so she can't take the college entrance examination for the next 5 years. Yi Jifan said very slowly. He told Commander Du the truth about Yi Ying's situation. He didn't believe that Commander Du didn't send someone to investigate these things. Since he couldn't hide it, he might as well tell him everything. At least, he could leave a good impression. At that time, I thought that I couldn't let my daughter go to the military. Since she can't take the college entrance examination, then she should go to the military. But I didn't know, Sai, because of some things in my family, my daughter also fainted in junior high school. When she went to the People's Hospital for a checkup, they found out that she had a heart problem. All these reasons made it even more impossible for her to go to the military. Although I wanted to, I had no choice but to accept the fact. After thinking for a while, I finally decided to send my daughter to study abroad. Yi Jifan let out a long sigh and said, "It's all because I didn't teach her well when she was young. Fortunately, she is not a bad girl. Otherwise, I would have a headache." After he told Commander Du the truth, the smile in Commander Du's eyes deepened. What he said was not different from his investigation. It was reasonable that Director Yi didn't want to talk about his family's problems. If she has a heart problem, she can go for a more detailed checkup. Other things are not important. It's just my daughter's little mind. Du Kaiwei had a little sister who was even more troublesome, so he didn't think that Yi Ying's things were out of line. Director Yi, you can think about it carefully. You don't need to answer me in a hurry. Director Yi is now in a high position, I can't help you with other things. Only if your daughter goes to the military, I can say something. Also, when my family found out that it was Director Yi who saved me, my parents really wanted to come to Southern Province to thank Director Yi in person. Unfortunately, both my parents were busy and couldn't get away. They could only wait for an opportunity to express their gratitude to Director Yi. When Yi Jifan heard this, he knew that he had made the right move. The Du family was indeed trying to rope him in. Thank goodness, thank goodness. Fortunately, he knew about Madame Li's past, so he did not rush to agree. When the Du family was investigating Yi Jifan had already investigated the Du family. However, he had always been cautious. When he found out that Madame Li was actually in charge of the Du family, he hurriedly investigated Madame Li's character. As a result, he found out that Madame Li had done something back then, which made him break out in a cold sweat. The old madam of the Du family had a cousin who had once lent half a liter of rice to the Du family during their most difficult time. About 10 years ago, that cousin saw that the Du family had become rich. He had not visited the Du family for a long time, so he took this opportunity to visit the Du family. He wanted to help his grandson, who had not been admitted to a good university, get in through the back door. Mrs. Li immediately agreed and sent her grandson to university. As a result, he was directly assigned to the most remote place after graduation. Chapter 1847. The cousin tried to get in through the back door again, but was rejected by Madame Li. She said, "I've already repaid the debt of half a liter of rice." "Cousin, are you trying to force me to repay your debt?" "I'm sorry, but I won't fall for that." It wasn't easy to investigate this incident, and it came from Staff Officer Du's hometown. If he didn't know, he would have brought his daughter's information to them. Taking things slowly was Yi Jifan's rule as an officer. He was never aggressive and never took risks. With someone supporting him from behind, he just needed to walk steadily. He knew that as long as he didn't make any mistakes, he would have a meteoric rise. Therefore, Yi Jifan was so cautious that he wouldn't take action immediately. No matter how much he wanted to send Ying to the army, he would stay calm. Because of his cautiousness, he avoided the minefield again and didn't let the Du family notice anything suspicious. With Du Kaiwei's words, Yi Jifan left Nangguang with a smile on his face. So what if Qin Dongfeng was capable? So what if Uncle Zhen was respected by so many soldiers when he was alive? He didn't care about Commander Liu and Political Commissar Yen. With the Du family's position in the army, he wouldn't give up on what he wanted for his daughter. Yi Jifan didn't mention to Sun Dongqing that he had a relationship with the Du family. Before the matter was settled, it was enough for him to keep it to himself. He didn't even want to mention Ying for the time being. Xia Jinyuan only found out that Yi Jifan had a relationship with the Du family at around 3:00 in the afternoon after the training in the mountains ended. Yi Qian said that he didn't want him to get involved, but as Yi Jifan's position increased, he couldn't really let his guard down. Since he wasn't in Nangguang, he naturally had to ask someone to keep an eye on him. If there were any big movements, he would know immediately. The person on the phone with him was none other than Xia Yiwei. The person who asked him to keep an eye on Yi Jifan was naturally her, the secretary of the southern province. About 40 days ago, Yi Jifan saved the life of Du Kaiwei, who had been at odds with his elder brother since he was young. He returned to Nangguang, and about half a month ago, he made another trip to Nangguang. His accompanying secretary inadvertently mentioned that Director Yi had gone to the Nangguang military district, so I guessed that he did indeed have dealings with the Du family. Yi Jifan actually saved Du Kaiwei's life. Xia Jinyuan furrowed his brows. How could things be so coincidental? Little Fox had just started a feud with Du Jie when Yi Jifan had already made friends with the Du family. Have you investigated who wants Du Kaiwei's life? Yes, Du Kaiwei led soldiers to cooperate with the relevant police to clear out a drug manufacturing village in Nangguang. When he showed up, he was seen by someone. The villagers cooperated to pay for his life. Xia Yiwei explained very clearly and also investigated very clearly. The person who helped her investigate was none other than Ho Zi, who was still showering in the bathroom. Sundays in the depths of winter were suitable for lying lazily in bed. Xia Yiwei rested her head on a soft, white pillow and looked at the falling snow outside the window. Her voice was charming but sharp as she said, "This time, it's really all connected. Our family Xia and the Du family have always been at odds. Who knew that my sister-in-law would come into conflict with Du Jie in advance, and in the end, Xia Yiwei described the network of relationships one by one. It was really complicated. In one sentence, she concluded, "It's really fate that my sister-in-law and our family Xia are fated. I'm also fated to be with your family Xia." A familiar male voice suddenly came through the phone. Xia Jinyuan did not even frown and said, "Help me ask Brother Z about the progress in France." Chapter 1848. The other side of the phone suddenly went silent, as if someone had covered it. After dozens of seconds of silence, Ho Zi, who had eaten her fill, lazily opened her mouth and said, "I can't delay the matter you asked me to do. Don't worry, everything is fine." Ho Zi, whose shoulder was pressed against the phone, stuffed Xia Yiwei, who was trying to snatch the phone back, into the blanket and said coldly, both of them have the surname Yi, but your Xiao Yi is much more interesting. She's like that woman in France who pretends to be aloof and flaunts her relationship with Ying. I just need to move my hands and she'll take the bait. She'll be busy now. Xia Jinyuan did not ask about the process, nor did he ask how Ho Zi was going to deal with it. When he found out that Ying was studying in France, he immediately contacted Ho Zi. Originally, he wanted to ask for his help to destroy Ying in France, but when he remembered that Ho Zi had blown up the underground gun warehouse in his villa in Mount Dalong, Xia Jinyuan changed his mind and asked Ho Zi to help lead Ying to the bad path. Xia Jinyuan knew that Ho Zi must have countless ways to lead Ying to the bad path. As long as Ying took the bait, she would suffer. France was Ho Zi's second hometown, and he knew a few people from all walks of life. Ho Zi, who had always done things appropriately, knew what to do and what not to do. Thank you, Brother Zi. I'll treat you to a drink when I go to Nan Province. You're welcome. I've been quitting drinking and smoking recently. Your sister has cut off all forms of entertainment that are harmful to the liver and lungs. If you want to treat me to a drink, I don't mind, but your sister does. Ho Zi used the blanket to wrap Xia Yiwei, who was struggling to get out of the blanket. His flirtatious peach blossom eyes smiled as he looked at his beloved woman who was blushing. He held the phone in one hand and the blanket in the other to prevent her from jumping up and making a fuss. He had been an underground lover for most of his life. It was time for him to become an official lover. Xia Yiwei's face was sullen, and her eyes were filled with anger. Ho Zi, if you don't let go, I'll make you pack up and leave right now. Let go of me, do you hear me? Xia Jinyuan heard her words clearly. The two of them had been entangled with each other for so many years and had gone through so many times, but they had never really cut off all ties. It was impossible for the two of them to break up. Ho Zi had hardened his heart and cut off his underworld ways. It took him 2 years to clear his name. He knew that Xia Yiwei would not be able to dump Ho Zi and marry another man. Seeing that the two of them had reconciled, Xia Jinyuan did not say much. He only said one more thing before hanging up the phone. Brother Zi, old madam has been waiting for my sister to get married and have children. Don't worry, don't worry. I'll definitely let old madam get what she wants. I'm hanging up first. I'm still a little scared of your sister's temper. Last night, she wanted me to kneel on 2 bowls. Now, she's so scared that she wants me to kneel on cactus. Ho Zi, shut up. Give me the phone. Xia Yiwei, who was wrapped up like a cocoon, roared. Just by listening to her voice, one could tell that Secretary Xia was not as intellectual and dignified as she usually was. Xia Jinyuan was not interested in eavesdropping on other people's private matters. He was about to hang up, but when he heard that Xia Yiwei still had something to say to him, he moved the phone away from his ear. He did not want to overhear the fun between the two of them. Yes, yes, yes. Baby, are you going through menopause? Why is your temper getting worse? Ho Zi was a gangster and did not mind talking dirty. Now that he had finally won the heart of his beloved woman, he coaxed her and approached her step by step, making it impossible for her to leave him. Chapter 1849. Xia Yiwei, who struggled out of the blanket, was choked by the word menopause. If it weren't for the fact that she had something to discuss with Xia Jinyuan, Xia Yiwei would have rushed into the bathroom and poured a glass of cold water on his face. Since she had something important to discuss, she only gave him a cold stare. Her snow-white arm came out of the blanket, revealing the kiss marks on the inside of her arm, adding to the ambiguous atmosphere. Old 6, tell Xiao Yi to be careful. We've been investigating the person behind Yi Jifan for several years, but we haven't been able to find any clues. If they can still guarantee his promotion, the water here is not ordinary. She could see how much old Sixth cared about Xiao Yi, and Xiao Yi was indeed not bad. It was old Sixth's blessing to be able to marry her. She only hoped that the two of them could be safe and sound, not have any twists and turns. I tried to ask the governor, but I didn't get anything. Yi Jifan's resume was clean, and his political achievements were excellent. It could be said that he could achieve some political achievements no matter what position he was in. It was as if he was born to be an official. The more he was like this, the more suspicious it was. Xia Yiwei treated Yi Qian as her family. Otherwise, she would have completely ignored him. After several years, she still couldn't find any information. It was clear that the person behind Yi Jifan was extraordinarily powerful. Xia Jinyuan had always known that the person behind Yi Jifan was extraordinarily powerful. Otherwise, with Yi Jifan's seemingly good political achievements that didn't bring any benefits to the people, it was impossible for him to be promoted so quickly. Now that he had connections with the Du family, it gave family Xia a chance. Hearing this, she said calmly, "Continue to help me keep an eye on him. If you can't find any loopholes in him, his daughter will become his loophole." With Ho Zi's methods, Yi Jifan's daughter must be living a prosperous life in France. As if thinking of something, his eyes darkened and he said, "Sister, ask his secretary to find an opportunity to ask if he still has the intention of sending his daughter to the military. If there was, then Du Kaiwei would definitely arrange for Yi Ying, who had heart problems, to enter the army. Her reputation in the country was ruined, and she had a bad record abroad. Regiment Commander Du, if you really want to repay that stab, then please arrange for Director Ye's daughter to join the army." Xia Yiwei was the secretary of the leader of the southern province. It was much more convenient for her to keep an eye on Yi Jifan. Moreover, Yi Jifan's secretary was friends with Xia Yiwei. It was not suspicious for her to ask some non-work-related questions. Tell Sixth Brother that he doesn't need to worry about France. Just focus on his own things. "I'm not capable of handling the matters in the army, but I can still contribute to the matters outside." Ho Zi, who was about to get dressed, leaned over and kissed Xia Yiwei on the cheek, leaving the two siblings alone. He had to go downstairs to prepare lunch for his wife. If he didn't prepare lunch now, dinner would be ready. Xia Jinyuan didn't talk for a long time. He had just finished the training, so he was actually a bit tired. When he took out his phone and saw Xia Yiwei had sent him a few text messages, "Call me back as soon as you see me." In front of him, Yi Qian was still standing quietly in the same place. There was a smile in his dark eyes. He slightly moved his ankle that he sprained last night, and then strode straight towards Yi Qian. Everyone was wearing a jungle combat uniform. The paint on their faces was smeared with sweat, making them look even more unrecognizable. There were still a few comrades who hadn't come back yet. While waiting, they didn't forget to exchange their training experience and tactics with each other. Diving for a long time requires you to finish it in one go. You can't stop at will in case of insufficient oxygen. However, for a long-distance march in the mountains, we must strike a balance between work and rest. When we need to run, we must increase our speed. When we need to rest, we must stop. Only then can we maintain our stamina and keep our body excited. J5 was talking to a few members of the Storm Commandos. Yi Jian stood beside and listened carefully. Chapter 1850. Every member of the Snowfield Brigade was very outstanding. Their tactical experience and training were accumulated over a long period of time. After more than 40 days of joint training, Yi Qian was amazed by the abilities of each of them. The T6 soldiers had delicate baby faces, but once they held a sniper rifle, they could directly complete an accurate sniper shot with a golden hook hanging upside down from a tree. The Longhawks and Sparrowhawks were the scouts of the team. As long as the prey was targeted by them, it would be impossible for them to escape from their sight. Moreover, they could complete the reconnaissance in the shortest time possible. Yi Qian always felt that she was full of energy from head to toe when she trained and fought with them. Because they were all role models for her to learn from on her way to the military. Fighting with a group of role models, she would never relax or think about slacking off. She would always be spurred on. The Navy's main mission is anti-reconnaissance, anti-landing, beach raiding, and so on. The military skills and abilities you all have are incomparable to other branches of the military. Previously, you focused on naval combat, so you were limited. In the future, you will move toward a more large-scale tri-service systematic combat. With the ability of the Devil King, I'm guessing that within 3 years, you will be a very terrifying naval special forces. Brothers of the Storm Team, I'm looking forward to the establishment of the 2nd Tri-Service Special Forces. Your predecessor was the military's Emergency Mobile Combat Force in the 1990s. In case of an emergency, you can be directly commanded by the General Staff Department. With such a powerful predecessor, there should be a tri-amphibious, special knife-wielding unit. Now that everything is finally settled, I'm looking forward to our next joint training. When the time comes, we can learn from each other again. I'm sure it will be very enjoyable. Just as J5 finished speaking, Yi Qian saw Xia Jinyuan, who was standing in the distance making a phone call, walking towards him. He smiled at him, then looked away and focused his attention on J5 again. Why did J5 say that he was looking forward to it? It had to be from the beginning of the 1990s when someone in Tai provoked our country, causing our entire army to be in a state of readiness for war from the second half of 1995. From 1995 to 1996, danger appeared again, and there was a transfer of troops from the south to the north. They only cared about one side and did not care about the other. It also made the military and the highest leaders in the Great Hall more aware of the lack of amphibious forces in our country. It wasn't until 1998 that the Nongguang Military District sent a division to be reorganized into another strong force of the Navy that the transfer of soldiers from the south to the north was resolved. After that, the military requested the Navy to launch amphibious operations. When the time was right, they immediately issued the order and ordered the establishment of a special amphibious frogman force. They were now known as the Amphibious Frogman Combat Unit. It had been less than 2 years since it was established the year before last, and now it was changed to amphibious. Such a big reform would make any soldier who knew about it happy. What did this mean? This shows that the growth of our country's national strength and military strength, as well as the conditions for war reserves, are maturing day by day. As a Special Forces soldier who guarded every inch of the country's land, how could he not be excited? Only when the country is strong can the people be strong. Only when the country is strong can the people be at peace. When they talked about the reform, Xia Jinyuan came over and made the atmosphere of the discussion more technical and academic. Wearing the jungle combat uniform, they were very clear that our country's current national defense technology and military equipment construction had entered a stage of rapid development. They needed to move forward with the times, and they could not be complacent and end up as useless chess pieces and retire with regret. When the devil came, the discussion reached an unprecedented level of excitement. Yi Qian, who was still a military school student, had his eyes shining, and his little face was faintly red with excitement. Chapter 1851. There will be big moves next. We are the Navy of South Island. Facing the complicated geographical environment of the sea in South Island, all navies must have amphibious capabilities. So the next move is to have the Navy engage in a full-scale amphibious operation to meet the current needs and future needs. This was Li Jinyan's speech. After hearing it, Yi Qian gave him and Xia Jinyuan many thumbs up in her heart. Although she didn't care about military affairs in her previous life, she had seen on TV that our army had held several large-scale exercises at sea in the next 10 years, which was the full-scale amphibious operation that Li Jinyan was talking about now. The future hadn't come yet, but they had already realized and prepared for it. Yi Qian could already hear the ups and downs of her excitement. The blood in her body flowed faster, and she was so excited that small beads of sweat appeared on the tip of her nose. How lucky she was to be able to fight side by side with them. When we move from mechanization to digitalization, there will definitely be a full-scale 3-army drill. Those who sail on the sea, fly in the sky, and run on the ground will all gather. Brothers, when we meet again at that time, how delightful it will be. How delightful, how delightful. As a female soldier, Yi Qian was even more ambitious when she heard this, and she couldn't calm down for a long time. Life was like a white steed passing through a crack, and in the blink of an eye, she disappeared between heaven and earth. In her previous life, she died an ordinary and cowardly death, so in this life, she must not waste her time. She must live a vigorous life. Those insidious villains were nothing. They spent their lives calculating, but they didn't know that they miscalculated their own lives. Whether it was Yi Ying or Du Jie, their world didn't have magnificent scenery, only darkness like a trench. Yi Qian's world was vast and boundless, and the army was her life stage. She would dance the most beautiful dance and live the most brilliant life. Come on, stack one. Stack one for the many times we will train and exercise together in the future. When the time comes, no one can be left out. In the depths of the dense forest, dozens of big hands were stacked. As there were too many people, some of the brothers stepped on another brother's knee and sat directly on his comrade's shoulder. To the special forces, this kind of stacking was a piece of cake. 22 Army Special Forces soldiers and 22 Navy Special Forces soldiers formed 2 teams. Their outstretched hands were stacked on top of one another. Because they were all wearing camouflage suits for jungle combat, there were also strips of lucky camouflage on the outside. From afar, they looked like 2 big trees with vines growing out of them. It was a spectacular sight. Qing Niao, our bridge is yours. Let's go. The comrade sitting on the top floor shouted. Yi Qian, who was the last to reach the top, jumped and ran. The comrade on the second floor reached out and firmly grabbed her outstretched hand. With a lift, Yi Qian agilely climbed to the second floor, then quickly climbed to the third floor. She stood in the middle like a flagpole between the 2 teams. She stretched out her arms and placed her hands on top of the large hands of her comrades. 1, 2, 3, for our next meeting in the future, all the best. Come on. Come on. All her comrades shouted together. Their voices weren't loud, but they were so uniform that it was as if one person was saying it. Although their voices were low, their momentum was great, like the low chime of a morning bell that reverberated in the depths of the valley. This was the friendship of a comrade, a friendship that went through life and death, and entrusted their backs to each other. Although they didn't make a sound, it was as deep as the sea and as vast as the sky. Chapter 1852. The promise of not one less was their promise to each other, as well as to themselves. However, they were Special Forces soldiers who walked on a knife's edge. Perhaps one day, they would fall off the knife and the cold gleam of the knife would pierce through their hearts. That would be an eternity. K7 chewed on this promise and committed it to memory. Looking at his comrades hugging each other and saying goodbye, he felt a slight warmth in his cold heart. Some people said that he was too cold and inhumane, and that it would be best for him to be reformed in the army. Perhaps he would be able to cover his face with his heart by going through life and death situations with the soldiers. He didn't say no, and a week later, someone sent him to the army. How many years had it been? It had been 8 years since he graduated from medical school when he was 19 years old, and now he was 27 years old. It had been so many years, but he had never thought of leaving the army. He had never thought of going home. The figure in front of him was so lively, so loyal, so why should he leave? This was his comrade. His comrade who had gone through life and death with him. After folding his arms, K7 stood far away. Looking at his comrades hugging each other, there was a smile in his eyes. Then, there was a smile on his pale face. In the end, his lips, which were rarely curved, were raised high. He walked very quickly, as if he was chasing after something. When he walked in front of a member of the Storm Commandos, he suddenly reached out and hugged him tightly. "See you next time, brother." It was the most common farewell hug, but the Snowfield Brigade members who saw it looked as if they had discovered a new continent. They stared at K7, who had never hugged his comrades before. The one who was hugged was Whale. He didn't know about K7's personal situation and habits, so he hugged him back and said, "Of course, of course." When he let go, the big smile on his face really blinded the eyes of his teammates in the Snowfield Brigade. His bad habit was gone. He could even hug his comrade. Fuck. When did it get better? Why didn't they know? Yi Qian didn't know either, but he noticed that Xia Jinyuan and the others' expressions were a little strange, so he asked softly, "Why are you guys so shocked when K7 hugged Whale? Isn't that normal?" "It's not normal." K7, who graduated from medical school at the age of 19, never hugged anyone. It was the same in the army before, and it was the same in the Snowfield Brigade. He has a psychological trauma, so everything is normal except for hugging, Xia Jinyuan explained in a low voice with a smile. He took this step, which means that he has overcome his psychological trauma. Hearing that, Yi Qian thought about it carefully and realized that K7 had never hugged his comrades before. Then, he saw him hug his comrades from Storm Commandos one by one. Yi Qian was very happy. Overcoming psychological trauma was not an easy task. "Qing Niao, I'm afraid it won't be easy for us to meet again after this farewell. You're a female soldier and the female soldier I admire the most." The great Whale walked over. He couldn't give the female soldier a solid hug, so he just hugged her lightly before letting go. He looked at her with his bright eyes and smiled gently but reluctantly. "Our team is also your team. You are welcome to come and train with us often. The Demon King will also be very happy to have you here." Xia Jinyuan heard the first part of the sentence very well, but the last part made him raise his eyebrows. Why did it sound like there was another layer of meaning? Yi Qian answered seriously, "You guys still have a lot of skills that I haven't learned yet. As long as there are arrangements, I will definitely return to the team." "Ha ha ha, sure, we'll all be waiting for you." Whale's laughter became louder. Chapter 1853. At this moment, they were all looking forward to meeting each other again. They could train together again. The sea, the mountains, the highlands, the Gobi Desert. They had been through all these together. If there was a chance, they would do it again. Big Whale did not know about the relationship between Yi Qian and Xia Jinyuan. Now that the training was over, there were no rules between them. Seeing that she agreed readily, he raised his voice and shouted at Li Jinyan, "Captain, do you really like Yi Qian to come over?" His voice was loud and penetrating. With Big Whale as the center point, it spread in all directions. Basically, the members of both teams could hear him clearly. Big Shark, who knew a little about the situation, raised his hand and rubbed his forehead. "Big Whale, you're trying to steal Qing Niao away in front of Q King. You're really bold." When the members of the Storm Commandos heard this, they immediately laughed and continued to tease him. Of course our captain likes her. Big whale, do you still need to ask? Look at how well they complete their cooperative training every time. Look at how good their chemistry is. How much do you like her to be able to cooperate so well? Meanwhile, Major Xia finally understood that these water ghosts had the same thoughts. They were trying to matchmake his little fox and the Devil King. When the members of the Snowfield Brigade heard this, they could not take it lying down. Brother, you're not being very nice. This is a female soldier in our team. One moment you were reluctant to let her go, and now you want to steal the beauty of our team. Brother, let's have a good chat. Who was the loudest just now? I can't tell that you guys have such thoughts. Let's go, let's find a quieter place to have a good chat. The people who said this were the members of the Snowfield Brigade who were unaware of the situation. The few who knew, such as G3, J5, Z7, and the scout, young Sparrow Hawk, were already looking at their Q King sympathetically. How pitiful. His girlfriend was stolen from him, but Q King could not do anything about it. Z7 was different from the others. He loved to watch the drama unfold. At this moment, he was enjoying the change in Q King's expression. That's right, he was enjoying it because he was jealous that Q King could see his girlfriend every day. How could Xia Jinyuan not know what his bad friend was like? He glanced at him, raised his eyebrows, and looked at Yi Qian. After a few seconds, he looked at Han Zhang again. This time, his gaze was somewhat provocative. His thin lips curled up slightly. Even his smile was so provocative. That smile really made one's heart itch. It was as if she was directly telling Han Zhang, don't think that you can see a good show from me just because of this. Give up. He must have suffered a huge blow. It's a little abnormal. After being provoked, Z7 muttered to himself. Then, his gaze landed on Yi Qian. Q King was so calm and could even reply to them with a provocative look. Could it be that he was not angry because of Yi Qian? Because Yi Qian would do something to make him happy, so he did not mind? Not angry at all. Z7 knew Xia Jinyuan well. After sorting out his thoughts, he immediately put on a straight face and pretended that he had not seen anything. J5 immediately walked over and said in a low voice, calm down. They don't know about your relationship with Qing Miao. It's okay if they don't know. Don't get angry. Maintain your composure. Don't make things unpleasant. As a man, watching his girlfriend being paired with another outstanding man, as a man, he felt very embarrassed and aggrieved. Chapter 1854. It was indeed embarrassing to encounter such a situation, but Major Xia Jinyuan was not an ordinary person. Nothing that could make him feel awkward had ever happened before. If his girlfriend was to be mixed up with another man, it would depend on whether that man was interested or not. Li Jinyan did not have feelings for Yi Qian. Since he knew that, why should he jump out? Of course, the most important point was that his girlfriend did not have feelings for another man. All in all, there was no need for him to jump out. He would only feel awkward if he jumped out. He would make everyone feel awkward and Little Fox would not be able to get out of this embarrassing situation. It did not matter if he was embarrassed. He was a thick-skinned man after all. However, this matter had to be resolved properly. He did not want to make things difficult for Little Fox. As for himself, he was not angry. Other than feeling a little stifled, he was also a little worried. He was worried about when his identity would become open and above board. However, he still had to put on an act. He had to let Little Fox know how aggrieved he was as a boyfriend who could not be exposed to the public. When he heard this, he said, "Don't worry. I still have some manners. The ignorant are innocent. When they find out one day, I will find a way to talk to them about the past. We'll talk about it in the future. Bear with it for now, J5 said and felt like laughing. You have to understand that the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. What's more, Qing Niao is extraordinary. Her talent and appearance are top-notch. The hormones in a man's body will cause trouble, and he will more or less have some fantasies about her. Cough, do you want to take a breather now? Major Xia felt that his comrade was too good at backstabbing him. He had not thought of anything else, but his comrade had thought of everything. What did he mean by, more or less fantasize about being with her? You're not here to comfort me so you can stab me a few times, right? Major Xia stared expressionlessly at his comrade who was trying hard to hold back his laughter. Fantasize about being with her. If you said, fantasize about being with a girlfriend like Qing Niao, I might be able to accept it. When J5 heard this, he laughed and patted Xia Jinyuan on the shoulder. He laughed so hard that his shoulders shook. I'm honest. I'm not lying. Please forgive me. An honest man can't go against his conscience and lie. It was good that she was not angry. He was really worried that a dispute would arise because of this. After laughing, J5 said seriously, but this also shows that as long as the two of you don't let the public know about your relationship, something like this will happen again. Q King, in my opinion, if you want to solve this problem, you should just ban the jokes between comrades. It doesn't matter to us guys. We're thick-skinned and flirty. She's a female soldier. If such jokes are made frequently, not only will it affect her mood, but it will also ruin her reputation. Yes, I'll make a statement after they leave. Xia Jinyuan, who had the same intention, nodded lightly. His gaze had already landed on Yi Qian. She still had to solve this problem herself. Due to his status, he had to wait for Demon King Li to make a statement first before he could stand up. Although the two teams trained together, they were two different teams after all. They had their own captains, so Li Jinyan had to be the one to stand up for the Storm Commandos. Xia Jinyuan, who was born in a military family, knew how to get along with his colleagues. He would not let himself make the mistake of overstepping his authority. Major Xia was also someone who would not let himself be taken advantage of. Since he wanted to let Yi Qian know that he was upset, his expression in the blink of an eye was so pretentious that even J5 silently distanced himself. As expected of a soldier king, he really knew how to act. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.